The first to return was Robin with a team of porters that worked with the handymen on the Ghost Shadow ship to carry fresh water and food, constantly filling the Ghost Shadow ship's storage. When I passed through the Marine branch on the road, I explored the surroundings and found that Marines were all assembled inside. Maybe we should expect some trouble. Robin, standing next to Ross, was overseeing many porters carrying food and fresh water on board. She looks at the Marine branch base building standing in the middle of the little town and laughs slightly. Ross sat on the guardrail of the Ghost Shadow ship deck and, without looking up, said, "Come on. They're lucky if they don't cause any trouble for us." Robin slightly smiled with her chin in her hand and said, "Marines here are probably afraid of us, but the news that we're here must have been sent back to the Marine headquarters, and there will probably be Marine soldiers waiting for us on Grand Line." Naturally, she knows that Marines won't fight them here. She is worried about the Marines on the Grand Line. However, how could Ross not understand her reminder? He turned to Robin and, with a slightly playful stretch of his finger, gave her a gentle click on her chin and said, "I can imagine that, but if Marine wants to fight us, then let them come." After being teased by Ross, Robin didn't have any blushing expressions, but instead smiled and stared at Ross. Ross looked at her for a few seconds and naturally regained his gaze and looked into the distant sea. He said, "It is already the end of November of the 11th year of the Great Age of Pirates." If he remembers correctly, the Robin is 17 years old now and her birthday should be on February 6th. That is to say, in another 2.5 months, she can take off the lowly title. Robin felt that Ross's sentence was incomplete and there might be the second half of the sentence, but Ross did not say it and she was confused. Half a day later, Lafitte returned to the ship and came to Ross. His wrists swayed as he has a watch like tied to his wrist, but at the center of the watch was not a dial, but a ball and a pointer. "Is this it, Captain?" Ross took the thing from Lafitte's hand. After a little observation, he nodded and said, "Yes, this is what replaces the sea maps and compass on the Grand Line." Ross hands the log pose back to Lafitte and lets him study and observe it by himself. Half a day later, food and fresh water filled the storage compartment of the Ghost Shadow ship. At Ross's command, Ghost Shadow ship untied the rope, set sail and left Barrows Town and headed straight towards the Reverse Mountain. While the Ghost Shadow ship was leaving the Barrows Town, Marines on Barrows Town immediately reported the current situation to Marine headquarters, but it had nothing to do with Ross. As the Ghost Shadow ship moved closer to the Grand Line, the weather and currents began to become unpredictable and the waves became more turbulent and the undercurrent surged. Ross arrived on deck and watched the course of Ghost Shadow ship with Lafitte. Under their control, Ghost Shadow ship did not wander into the calm belt but went to the Reverse Mountain. Grand Line and Red Line divide the planet into east, west, north, and south. The ocean currents of the four seas will gather at one place and finally flows into the Grand Line. That's the Reverse Mountain. Based on his memory, Ross is calm about the changes in the current, although it is west blue and not east blue, which was passed by Luffy and others. It's a minor gap. Behind the mist in the sea, there is a magnificent red wall-like structure that stretches all the way to the end of the line of sight. It is the Red Line. Robin stood on the deck and looked at the Red Line, saying, "What a spectacular sight." "That's Red Line." Lafitte had a strange smile on his face, but his excited eyes revealed that his heart was surging like a wave. Even Ross looks at the spectacular and magnificent Red Line which divides the whole world, has a thrill of excitement in his heart. Looking at the real deal is a very different experience. While looking at Red Line, Ross looked at the parallel Grand Line. Reverse Mountain is the starting point of the first half of the Grand Line and the end of the second half of the Grand Line. The final island, Raftel, is mostly hidden in the mist. But, without the guidance of the road poneglyph, no one can find Raftel. Even if he directly crossed the Grand Line through the calm belt, he wouldn't be able to find Raftel. He would only be able to move around like a headless fly in the sea. Ross only looked at it and then took his eyes back, because he was not interested in the so-called Raftel, or the so-called One Piece. He was just a little curious about them. Crash. As the Ghost Shadow ship gradually approached the Reverse Mountain, the sea currents became more and more violent and the entire ship slammed towards Red Line. Under the control of Ross and Lafitte, Ghost Shadow ship sailed into the canal of the Reverse Mountain and climbed all the way up to the top of the mountain and finally rushed into the Grand Line. At the same time, in front of the Twin Cape Lighthouse on the end of the Reverse Mountain, an old man was sitting there reading the newspaper. He turned his head in the direction of the Reverse Mountain Canal. He is the Warden Crocus of the Twin Cape Lighthouse and the doctor of the Pirate King Roger's ship. "Well, Another pirate force has stepped into the Grand Line and he doesn't know where this batch will go. Crocus put down his newspaper and looked towards the ghost shadow ship at the reverse mountain canal. He often reads newspapers and news from all over the world. He has a slight impression on the ghost hand pirates, but it is just a little impression. Because this is the starting point of the Grand Line, there have been countless pirates pouring in here in 11 years, but out of them all very few people can make a name for themselves on the Grand Line. Perhaps the ghost hand pirates will just be one of those no-name pirates. So with only a single glance, Crocus regained his gaze. A few days later, the news that ghost hand pirates had left West Blue and drove into the Grand Line spread all over West Blue. While countless pirates and marines breathed a sigh of relief, their eyes converged on Grand Line. Grand Line, known as Pirates' Graveyard, has silently devoured a large number of pirates that dominate West Blue for more than a decade, many of which had a bounty as high as 80 million berries. Now, the ghost hand pirates had also stepped into the Grand Line. Whether they turned into a small wave that was annihilated on the Grand Line or a storm that will sweep through the Grand Line, no one can say for sure. In the stormy rainstorm, there are huge waves on the sea, wrapping the ghost shadow ship and taking it up and down, which makes it difficult to maintain a stable course. How long till we reach the first island? Under the command of Navigator Lafitte, Robin used her ability to constantly change the sails and barely controlled the ship's course in the storm. Many handymen also worked hard to support her. Lafitte stood there with a serious expression and looked at the log pose worn on his wrist. He said, "It's hard to judge. It's the first time I've entered the Grand Line. I didn't expect the weather and currents here to be so troublesome. Now I'm off course. No harm." Ross stepped out of the cabin and stood steadily on Ghost Shadow ship which was rising and falling with the waves. "As long as we keep sailing in the direction pointed by log pose, we will surely reach an island. It is not clear which island Ross will arrive at. There are at least 7 routes on the Grand Line and only one of them was traveled by Straw Hat pirates." Crash! In the raging rainstorm, a wave of about 20 meters high appeared from the front, sweeping across the sky and smashing down against Ghost Shadow ship. "Be careful." Lafitte's face changed. Robin was also shocked. She was a devil fruit user. It was very dangerous for her when the waves fell and there was nothing she could do to stop them. Just in a short time, Ross pulled out his named sword Happy Spring out of his waist. His sword was surrounded by armament hockey as he cut the sword against the waves. See. Ross's sword energy released by his named sword Happy Spring is as powerful as Onigumo's Rankyaku Tempest Kick, which split the nearly 20 meters high from the center and Ghost Shadow ship sailed from the middle of the waves. The strange weather on the Grand Line cannot stop someone who is really strong and it can only stop those ordinary pirates. Who? Captain's sword arts are also very unreal. Lafitte's eyes flickered slightly and he expressed his respect and admiration for Ross at the right time. Ross stood with his hands down and his eyes calm. After the Ghost Shadow ship crossed the waves, the scene changed instantly. There were 2 different shadows in the left front and right front of the fog. One was a pirate ship and the other was an ice block of nearly 100 meters in length. Pirate ship is found in the left front and huge ice blocks are found in the right front. After Robin saw the situation in the fog, she immediately reported to Ross. At that moment, the undercurrent suddenly surged violently and Ghost Shadow ship was instantly wrapped up by the undercurrent and slammed into the direction of the huge ice block. Not far away, while Robin found a group of pirates on the nameless pirate ship, they also found the existence of the Ghost Shadow ship. Compared with Ghost Shadow ship, they seemed to be in a lot of confusion in the stormy rainstorm and their sails seemed to be broken by hail. "Boss. There is a ship over there, a pirate ship." The captain of pirate ship listened to his subordinate's report and frowned in the direction of the Ghost Shadow ship. Now that the ship hull was badly damaged, he did not want to clash with other pirate ship in such stormy weather. But just as he was about to order a diversion to avoid Ghost Shadow ship, he suddenly saw that Ghost Shadow ship was wrapped up by the undercurrent at the bottom of the sea and crashed towards the huge ice block in the distance, accelerating all the way and seemingly unable to stop. "What? Don't panic. Watch out for undercurrents on the seafloor and stabilize the ship's hull first." The pirate captain watches this scene, his eyes twinkling and the corners of his mouth slightly raised. If the other side is hit by the huge piece of ice too, it will crush them. This small advantage can be used by him. It's not so much as the Ghost Shadow ship crashing into the huge ice block floating on the sea, but it is the opposite. The huge ice block is crashing into the ghost shadow ship, which is in between his own ship and the ice block, so if the ice block crashes into the ghost shadow ship, then his ship will be saved. However, before ghost shadow ship is hit by the huge ice block, a figure flew up from the ghost shadow ship and stepped out into the gale rainstorm and fell towards the huge ice block with a lot of astonished eyes on his figure. Someone jumped out of that ship. That guy is flying in the sky. Am I dreaming? Many of the pirates on the nameless pirate ship are looking in the direction of the ghost shadow ship. Seeing this scene, they are a little surprised and amazed. And in the next moment, Ross's figure has fallen onto the huge ice block. Gotcha. When Ross's figure fell, the huge ice block cracked under the influence of the power of distortion, centering on Ross's position and spreading in all directions. Bang! Eventually, the huge 100-meter wide ice block was completely destroyed by the power of distortion and turned into numerous small pieces of ice that shot in every direction. Ghost Shadow Ship, which was about to hit the ice, easily crushed the many small broken ice blocks and stabilized. The unnamed pirate ship, along with its pirates, including the captain, has long been shocked by this scene, and many people have revealed an almost unbelievable look. That iceberg, broken, is this a dream? The pirate captain could not help but swallow as he watched the scene. He was also an unusual pirate in North Blue, with 13 million berries bounty on his head, but he was frightened by the storm. That huge ice block still scared him. When he noticed that the ghost shadow ship in the distance seemed to be turning on its bow and sailing towards his ship, a sudden look of horror appeared in his eyes. Fast. Turn quickly. Crash. The undercurrent of the sea surged again, happily wrapping his ship, and took his ship to the distance, away from the ghost shadow ship. As ghost shadow ship disappeared into the fog, the pirate captain wiped the cold sweat on his forehead, and he was still a little frightened. His subordinates looked at each other with a sigh of relief. I think we should go back to North Blue. Everyone nodded in perfect agreement. Ross, who has smashed the huge ice block and returned to the deck of his ship, watched the nameless pirate ship quickly disappear in the mist wrapped up in the sea undercurrent. For these nameless pirates hovering in the beginner area of the Grand Line, Ross is like a high-level warrior who has returned to the novice village, so he has no interest in the chickens of the novice village. Experience doesn't add up at all by killing these low-level beginners, and the acquired money is not worth the effort put into killing them. Stable roots, continue to move forward. Ross looked up at the gradually turning sunny sky, and instead of heading for the pirate ship, he headed into the direction pointed by the log pose. Lafitte bowed and said, "Okay, Captain. In this chaotic weather of sometimes sunny and sometimes windy rainstorm or even snow, Ghost Shadow Ship rides through the most chaotic sea in the world and arrives at the first island on the route in the first half of the Grand Line. Luden Town. This is Ross's first island on the Grand Line route. This small town is not chaotic, but orderly. The Ghost Shadow Ship, which arrived at the port, did not cause any movement here. It seems that people here are accustomed to pirates. This is the Grand Line. It doesn't seem to be anything unusual." Walking into the town, Lafitte spun his red cane and looked around. Maybe. Ross was calm and not interested in whether the island was unusual or not. Log Pose needs to stay on the island for a while to record the magnetic waves of the islands to point to the next island, so we have to stay on this island for a few days. Lafitte looked at the log pose worn on his wrist and noticed that the needle of the log pose was not fixed like it is supposed to be, and it was constantly shaking. He said, "Understood. I will report immediately when the magnetic waves are fully recorded." Ross nodded and said, "Well, for now, you can all move freely." Lafitte swung his cane in one hand and pulled his hat eaves in the other, saying, "Whoop, I really want to explore the island of the Grand Line." Robin nodded and said, "I am also interested in the history of this island." The three of them separated. Robin went to explore the history of island, while Lafitte went to find something interesting for him. As for Ross, he found a noodle restaurant and ordered a ramen. On the harbor pier, in a dark room, a man pushed open a door and came inside a room. He switched on the light of the room, illuminating a messy hall, clapped his hands and shouted, "Guys, the prey is here." There was a lot of alcohol in the room, and similarly, there were a lot of people lying in the middle of the room. There were also a few dancing girls with a good figure in the middle of the room. The scene was very chaotic. Someone heard the shouting, rubbed his head and opened his eyes, saying, "Oh, it's Walter. What prey made you run so fast? I haven't even woken up yet. Last night." "Stop. This prey is extraordinary." Walter stopped him with a gesture and shouted again at the people lying in the room. When everyone was woken up, he took out a bounty poster and patted it on the table in the middle of the crowd. The amount of money on the bounty poster was 92 million berries, and the photo and the name marked below is undoubtedly, it's Ghost Hand Ross. The crowd was the pirate hunter gang gathered here. There were countless new pirates who sailed into the Grand Line and fell into their hands. They cut their heads and took their bounty. 92 million berries. I am not mistaken. When the half-asleep crowd saw the bounty reward, they were instantly awoken and stared at it. The pirates they usually hunt has at most 30 million bounties on their head. A single pirate with a bounty of 92 million berries has not appeared on this island, and it is completely outside of their hunting range. Hey, Walter, do you want us to die? That's a strong pirate with a bounty of 92 million berries. We won't be able to deal with him. Someone stared at the bounty order and spoke quietly. When Walter heard this, he grinned and said, "It's not what you think. This guy doesn't come down from the top, he's a newcomer from the bottom." From the top down, it refers to an island from the Grand Line, where someone sails backward, and from the bottom up, it naturally refers to the newcomers who have just arrived from the four seas. What? Several people present heard the words and looked at each other instantly, showing a look of disbelief in their eyes. Does a newcomer have a bounty of 92 million berries on his head? No kidding. They have been pirate hunters for so long, but they have never heard of such a high bounty reward for a newcomer. I didn't believe it at first. Walter grinned. I saw their pirate flag on the dock just now. I went to check it specially and found out that this guy really is a newcomer. He is a pirate from the West Blue. They're called Ghost Hand Pirates. If some pirate from the Grand Line has a bounty of 92 million berries, he would not dare to provoke him, but it is a different matter if the said pirate is from the four seas. The bounty reward does not represent absolute strength, but the assessment of the threat degree of a pirate by the world government. In the four seas, a pirate with a bounty of 50 million berries may not be able to compete against a pirate who has a bounty of 30 million berries on the Grand Line. Really? Hearing Walter's affirmative tone, many people still have some doubts, but they still showed a thoughtful expression. Some people thought for a moment and couldn't help but say, but the 92 million berries bounty is a little too exaggerated, even for a pirate coming from West Blue. I'm afraid it will be very difficult for us to deal with him. That's not necessarily true. Walter smiled and reached out and put another bounty poster on the table. Look at this woman. She's also a crew member of the Ghost Hand Pirates, and there is a bounty of 79 million berries on her head. I checked, and she is the devil child of O'Hara. The government apparently offered such a high bounty on her because they wanted to cover something up. Hiss. Seeing another high bounty poster on the table, the people present were stunned for a moment and were left breathless. 92 million plus 79 million. This is more than 170 million berries. They had a busy year, and the total bounty they gathered by hunting pirates together may not amount to this much money. I will tell you one more thing. Eileen's ladies are probably watching them, and they won't let them go either. If we're late, such a large amount of bounty will slip away from our hands. Once, there was a pirate who had a bounty of more than 60 million berries on his head, and he arrived at their island. They hesitated and did not go after him. As a result, Eileen group took him down, and they were only slightly injured. Turned out that the pirate's strength was very low, and the reason that guy had such a high bounty was that he killed many civilians in the South Blue. Hearing the other pirate hunter gangs such as Eileen's and others had been eyeing the 92 million berries pirate, several people's eyes finally turned red as they looked at each other and then clapped the desk and stood up. Yes. This time we must not let Eileen's and others take the lead. More than 170 million berries bounty. Killing these two pirates will be enough for them for a few years. At the same time, several other pirate hunter gangs who lived in the town almost all stood up at the same time, and the eyes were greedy and excited as if they were a shark who has smelled blood. An invisible storm is brewing over the town. The history of this island has been completely destroyed by the war. Robin walked on the edge of Luden town and inspected the small town and shook her head. After all, it was one of the first islands on the Grand Line. There are always pirates here, and conflict is a common thing here. Unless there were something unspoiled things like the poneglyph stone tablet, there would be no history left. After exploring the town, she returned to the original road, where she met Lafitte. It looks like you're going back, Miss Robin, but some of the guys on this island don't seem very friendly to us. Lafitte leaned on the red cane and smiled at Robin. Robin calmly said, "Yes, I found out, so I'll go back to Captain as soon as possible." As an intelligence officer on the ship, she was naturally aware of those spying eyes on them, but she did not want to deal with them. But still, in line with the duties of an intelligence officer, Unless they had to deal with the situation, they would first report to Ross. Lafitte still had an elusive look, smiling and nodding at Robin. Whether it is Robin or Ross, or Lafitte, their emotions and psychology are always hard to figure out, except that the first two faces mostly remain calm in most situations, while Lafitte remains weird. Quickly, Robin and Lafitte found Ross at the harbor pier, and Ross was watching a group of handymen carrying fresh water and food on board. Ghost Shadow ship has a large bottom cargo hold. Fully stocked freshwater and food are enough to support them for more than a few months. They only used about half of their cargo to reach Luden town from Barrows town, but stocking the ship with more fresh water and food is definitely not a bad thing. Every time the ship arrives at an island, they have to try their best to fully stock essential things. Some of the ingredients purchased were noodles from the noodle shop, which tasted good. Ross thought Robin could learn from it and cook for him later. "Captain, I have a message for you." Arriving at the dock, Lafitte waved his red cane and smiled at Ross. "There seems to be a lot of pirate hunters on this island. We're already being targeted." It turned out to be pirate hunters. Ross nodded. He had long noticed that someone was staring at him in secret, but he didn't know whether it was pirate or a Marine scout, and he never paid attention to it. "I know, don't worry about it." Seeing that Ross wasn't very worried, Lafitte whirled his cane and said, "I hope these poor pirate hunters don't come over to find trouble, or they will be in big trouble." However, for the many pirate hunters gathered on Luden town, a bounty like Ross is very enticing, and he is a newcomer who has just stepped on the Grand Line from West Blue. He is like a fresh fat fish on a chopping board, which can't be let go easily. Just as the freshwater and food supplements got stocked in the ship, a group of about a dozen pirate hunter came out of the west side of the pier. In this group of pirate hunter, the leader was a woman of unusual appearance, with a huge machete on her shoulder. An unusual rough face is not enough to describe her face that makes people unable to look straight at her. Immediately afterward, another group of people came over from the east side of the dock. It was also a personal gang of about 10 people. The leader was a fat man carrying a heavy machine gun, wearing a leather cap and smoking a cigarette. Seeing the two groups gathered together, the handymen carrying things on the docks showed fear. They put down the things in their hands and quickly hid. "Hey, Eileen, this fat sheep was first discovered by us. Get out of here." Walter, carrying a heavy gun, grinned at the rough-looking Eileen, with a wicked look on his face. He. Eileen opened her scarred eyes and sneered at Walter. "When did you first find out? If you don't want to die here, then scram." Walter's eyes were exposed to the cold, and the tone was harsh. "Smelly women, just because we let you go the last time, don't think of us as weak. We are not afraid of you." Eileen's eyes were cold when she heard the words. Both sides pulled out their weapons and prepared to confront each other at the wharf where Ghost Shadow ship was located. When the situation was in a deadlock, another group of people came from the south of the pier, led by two middle-aged men, one tall and one short. They were unequal in height but looked alike, and they brought more than a dozen people with them. Hey, what a lively scene. Corbello, Bartz, are you also going to join in when you came so late? Walter looked coldly at the newcomers. Although we usually have a first-come first-serve rule, this is not the case right now. The tall man Corbello grinned. Ghost Hand pirates have a total bounty of 170 million berries. It is already very extraordinary. You just want to eat it all, aren't you afraid that you will break all your teeth? Bart stood beside him and smirked. That's it. There is a pirate with such a high bounty, I'm afraid it will not be so easy to deal with him. If you can deal with him, you will suffer heavy casualties. Can you survive on this island afterward? Corbello and Bartz's words made the tension in the field a little smoother. Eileen and Walter also loosened their weapons. I think it's best to cooperate. 170 million berries. Even if the three of us divide it equally, it will still be a lot of money, and if someone isn't satisfied, we can just wait till we have the money and fight again. Corbello grinned. However, Walter snorted and said, you can cooperate with me, but you can't cooperate with this smelly lady. We'll work together to kill her first. When Eileen heard this, she suddenly showed a dangerous expression and said coldly, Walter, I think you really want to die right now. The situation in the field once again changed, however. Just then, a voice came into the arena with a slightly weird note in it. Lafitte was standing on the guardrail of the Ghost Shadow ship, spinning a red cane and looking down at the three groups of pirate hunter. I say, if you guys want to fight each other, can you do it someplace else? Our captain and we are getting a little bored. Walter, Eileen, and others have always taken pirates as prey, so they didn't care at first, But when they heard Lafitte's words, some people turned their heads. "Who are you? It seems that there is no bounty on him, a worthless fellow." Several pirate hunters looked at him with disdain. Others grinned at Lafitte and said, "Don't worry, you won't need to be bored soon, because your journey ends here." "Ah, that's terrible news, but my journey has just begun and I don't want to end it here, what do you think?" Lafitte was not angry, but he showed a strange smile. As soon as the first half of the sentence was finished, he disappeared silently. When he appeared again, he had already come behind the person who had just spoken, and there was a gun in his hand. The people present stared at first as they were shocked because no one noticed how Lafitte suddenly came to their side. It was as if he used magic to suddenly disappear and then reappear at their side. Having a gun pointed at him, the pirate hunter's forehead overflowed with a cold sweat. He did not expect a worthless Lafitte to suddenly disappear and then instantaneously reappear next to him. "So, do you think that's the end of your journey?" Lafitte still has a weird expression on his face. Bang! Almost as the cold sweat on the forehead of the pirate hunter slipped down from his cheek and the crowd reacted, pointing the weapon at Lafitte, Lafitte fired his gun. There was a bang sound as blood splashed and the pirate hunter shook, with a look of panic on his face, and he fell to the ground. "Damn! Kill him!" Many pirate hunters watched the scene, looking furious. After aiming at Lafitte they opened fire, and for a time the only sound that was heard was that of guns firing. But each person only fired for 2 or 3 times and then stopped pulling the trigger because Lafitte's figure had disappeared again like a phantom. "I am sorry about Captain. It seems that they will not kill each other." Lafitte appeared beside Ross, and the gun in his hand has disappeared and no one knew where he was hiding it. He apologized to Ross for attacking without permission. Ross didn't mind. "It's okay." At this time, many pirate hunter also found that Lafitte had returned to the Ghost Shadow ship and could not help but point their weapon at Ross, Robin, and Lafitte, standing on the side of Ghost Shadow ship. This time Eileen or Walter, instead of clashing with each other, looked at the 2 men and 1 woman on the Ghost Shadow ship. They were apparently shocked by Lafitte's ghostly ways, and the main point was that Lafitte didn't have a bounty at all. They didn't expect him to be strong. In addition to Lafitte's completely respectful manner towards Ross the pirate with a bounty of 92 million berries, Ross's presence exerts heavy pressure on them. They don't seem so easy to deal with. Corbello put away his smile and his face became very grave. He said to Walter and Eileen, "Private things should be put aside first. This time, we really have to work together. Otherwise, I'm afraid we'll really lose control of Luden town because of the heavy casualties on our part. There are many pirate hunters on Luden town, but they mainly belong to the 3 big gangs. Many foreign pirate hunters are excluded by them." "Humph." Eileen snorted, but said nothing, apparently agreeing with Corbello, and Walter's solemn eyes expressed his intent. "Since they are not so easy to deal with and no one can handle them alone with certainty, let's work together for a while and then divide the bounty. The pirates with the bounties of 171 million berries must possess some skills, but this is the grand line." Walter silently stared at Ross and his companions, took the lead in pulling the trigger of the shoulder-mounted heavy machine gun, and the dense bullet shower immediately swept towards Ross, Robin, and Lafitte. At the same time, many gun-wielding pirate hunters also aimed at Ross and his companion and open-fired. Those who were carrying portable cannons fired a cannonball towards them. Whiz! Whiz! Robin and Lafitte both retreated toward each side. Lafitte pulled out his gun to fight back and Robin crossed her arms, intending to launch an attack using her powers. However, at this time, Ross's voice was heard. "Stand back, I will deal with." Although Robin and Lafitte worked together to deal with this group of pirate hunters, Ross did not intend to stand by, but to solve it quickly. He did not like to watch a useless farce. Dense bullets were fired on Ross, all of them fixed there, all of which showed signs of distortion. Ding ding dong. Ross's hands were empty and the bullets that were stuck on him were all twisted and squeezed by a strange force. The bullets were instantly gathered in front of him and were crushed into lumps of iron. He's a devil fruit user. Walter and others stared for a moment and were immediately shocked. Although devil fruit users are common on the Grand Line, they still have a strong deterrent. Crack! Ross threw away the pieces of iron made from the bullet and shells. He flashed and jumped off the side of the ship and landed on the dock. "Come on, let's fight together." Although they don't know what Ross's devil fruit power is, Walter and others haven't seen any devil fruit user, and even if they are a little scared, they are able to remain calm. Among the crowd's shouts, countless people pulled out their swords and rushed up to Ross. The shining swords fell fiercely on Ross. But a strange scene appeared. All the swords touching Ross's body were like mud. They twisted and bent directly and become L-shaped. The swords that stab at Ross were like snakes. Ross calmly walked forward. All the swords falling on him were twisted silently. He stretched out his fingers and stroked them gently. All the people who had been touched by his fingers showed strange twists in their bodies, and their upper and lower bodies were directly separated. Damn! What kind of ghost power is this? This scene finally scared everyone. Whether it was Walter or Corbello, they were all horrified. To be a pirate hunter, you have to distinguish the scope of your prey. If you don't know it clearly, you will have no chance against them, just like now. Ross's voice was flat. His was moving forward, and wherever he went, or when his fingers touched any pirate hunter, their bodies were separated. In the past, Ross could only break or twisted bones and tendons of any human being, but now he can do it from a deeper level of distortion, extending from the surface to the level of cells. Wherever his fingers touched, there was no sound of bone breaking or anything like that. Even on the half-amputated bodies of pirate hunters, whose bodies were separated, there was no blood. It was such a weird separation of the whole body. Abominable. Eileen was grinding her teeth as she watched an unstoppable Ross step forward. Instead of flinching back, she held a huge machete in both of her hands and fiercely cut at Ross. The machete fiercely falls towards Ross, however. Faced with the huge machete, Ross showed no expression. He took back his finger and bent his finger at the coming machete as if he had no strength at all. The bullet didn't even make a sound. The huge machete seemed to have turned into mud, and Ross's finger passed directly over it, dividing the whole machete into two parts. That's really ugly. Ross's eyes showed a rare look as he could not bear to look straight at it. When he lifted his foot, the sand under his foot surged directly, wrapping the other side around it and then twisted and squeezed. Nevertheless, Ross's eyes were still not cured. He closed his eyes and used his sense of smell. The remaining 7 or 8 pirate hunters, who watched as Eileen was crushed and killed by Ross in seconds without any resistance, were terrified. Hell! Is this guy really a newcomer pirate who just stepped into the Grand Line? Looking at the Ross in the field, their backs were filled with cold sweat and fear quickly gripped their hearts. They stepped back carefully and then began to turn and flee. You came here to kill me, don't expect to leave here with your lives. Ross's eyes were calm and held a hint of indifference. He raised his hands and held them at the fleeing hunters. The sand under his feet rushed wildly, covering all the 7 or 8 people who fled. As Ross's fist tightened sharply, there was a popping sound like a tomato being trampled on, and afterward, there was no sound. Great Age of Pirates 12 year in January, the Ghost Hand Pirates stepped on the Grand Line in Luden town, one of the starting islands. He killed all the local pirate hunters' gangs, showing his abilities for the first time on the Grand Line. On every Grand Line route, every initial island is the gathering place for pirate hunters, which is also the first test that all pirates who set foot on Grand Line need to go through. Only by passing this step can they become a pirate of the Grand Line. After killing the 3 pirate hunter gangs that control Luden town, no one dared to fight them. Ross and others spent 3 days on the island. After the magnetic storage of the log pose was full, they left the Luden town and headed towards the next island. At the same time, Marine Headquarters has already received news of Ross's appearance in Luden town, and they have also determined Ross's route. Compared with the numerous islands of West Blue, the first half of the Grand Line also has a large number of islands, but on the Grand Line the navigation depends upon the log pose and eternal pose, plus a log pose needs to stay on the islands for several days to store magnetism. Routes are easy to judge. And corresponding. Marine owns almost all of the eternal pose of the islands in the first half of Grand Line. Once deployed, Marine can reach their designated location directly without the trouble of log pose. He's really here. Very well, I won't give you any more chance this time. Transmit orders to the G8 branch base. Doberman listened to the reports from his subordinates about the appearance of Ghost Hand pirates and the following slaughter that took place in Luden town, his eyes revealing a killing intent in them. He did not intend to give Ross an opportunity to continue his journey and get stronger. He will work together with other Marines to eradicate Ross on the starting point of the Grand Line. Under his command, within the G8 Marine base nearest to Ross's route, the atmosphere became serious. Numerous Marines with solemn expressions were ready for departure, and a large number of battleships gathered quickly. Marine seldom initiates obliterating actions against pirates, but once they really focus upon a group of pirates, it is almost impossible for the pirates to escape. Because, in this sea, The most powerful forces are not the New World's Yonko, 4 emperors, pirates, not even 7 warlords of the sea, but world government and marines. This is the period where marines are the strongest. Zephyr hasn't broken his arm, Garp hasn't retired, and the strongest older generation are still at their peak, and there are currently 3 marine admirals, Aokiji, Akainu, and Kizaru behind them. It would be difficult to send troops to the sea to destroy a Yonko force, but if one of the 4 emperors' forces were to engage marine head-on, there was hardly any chance for the Yonko force to win. It has been 5 days since they left Luden town. In the Ghost Shadow ship practice room, Ross is standing in front of a square piece of steel, clenching his fists and punching it continuously. He is practicing armament hockey. With Ross's current physical strength, even while using beginner-level armament hockey, any punching bag will burst open under a single punch, and only the block steel can withstand his punching power. Armed. In the process of punching, Ross constantly manipulated armament hockey around his arm to make it cohesive. Finally, after several tries, armament hockey is condensed to a certain extent, producing a qualitative change, which instantly turned his fist black. Bang! He punched the square steel block, and the sound produced shook the whole practice room. This punch leaves a very obvious punch mark on the huge and strong steel block. I can only succeed about 1 or 2 times out of 10. Ross looked at his fist, and before he could swing it again, the dark color on his fist could no longer be maintained. Once again, the armament hockey on Ross's fist collapsed. Starting from changing the focus of his practice and upgrading his physical fitness and armament hockey, his physical fitness and hockey have been continuously improving. By the time he arrived at Luden town, he had been able to occasionally release armament hockey hardening, but in most cases, it collapsed and could not be perfectly controlled. And now, over the past 5 days, he has gradually mastered the real point of armament hockey hardening, and his armament hockey is strong enough to support the hardening of both of his fists. He has been gradually able to control the strength of armament hockey hardening slightly. Hockey is up to standard, but it would be easier to harden if it could be strengthened a little more. Ross looked at the square steel in front of him, with a hint of thought. Compared with armament hockey, he did not practice observation hockey during this period, but his observation hockey is not low. Because observation hockey's practice and its use are related to keeping calm, Ross can keep calm in most cases, so he is better at observation hockey. In addition to hockey, Ross has not fallen behind in the development and practice of his distortion fruit. Although right now his focus is on armament hockey, distortion fruit is still his most important power. From the battle on Luden town, where he lifted the power of distortions slightly and extended it to a deeper level, it was clear that he had taken full control of the upgraded power of distortions. Ross walked out of the practice room and was about to find something to drink, and he happened to see Robin sitting at the table with a cup of lemon tea on it. He walked over and took it. Robin put down her book and showed a palpitating smile and said, "Captain, can you stop being so casual? Don't worry, I don't mind the casualness. Where are we now? How far till the next island?" Ross asked as he put down his cup and looked at the sea. The distance between Luden town and Elias Island, at the speed of Ghost Shadow ship, it should be about 10 days. Lafitte's figure appeared this time, responding to Ross. Ross nodded, looking at the sea and thinking. Robin's eyes paused for a moment on the cup Ross put back on the table, put down the book in her hand and said to Ross, "We may be blocked by the Marines on the next island." "Oh." Ross turned to Robin. Robin said in a positive tone, "Before, on Luden town, I gathered information about several islands in the nearby sea and found that Marines' G8 branch base is very close to our route. It's almost impossible for the ordinary pirates who has just set foot on the Grand Line to attract an all-out encirclement and suppression from a Marine branch, but the Ghost Hand pirates are different. It is impossible for Marines to not move against them. The Marine branch on the Grand Line is not comparable to the West Blue branch. Here they are equipped with at least 2 Vice Admirals branches and a large number of battleships. The heavy cannons loaded on the large battleships are far more powerful than the small cannons. It will not take them long to destroy a ship like Ghost Shadow ship in the case of concentrated bombardment. G8 branch." Ross's eyes flashed lightly and said, "We can only follow the log pose, we can't bypass the next island. This kind of thing can't be avoided. If they want to come and fight us, let them come." Robin gently smiled and sat back in the chair, saying, "Captain is still so confident." Although she had a smile on her face, her tone was not relaxed. Ross's actions have angered Marine executives, and she is also wanted by the world government, and before entering the Grand Line, They have already turned the West Blue upside down, attracting a lot of attention. In this case, once their whereabouts are revealed, Marine will inevitably go all out to encircle and suppress them and will not give them the opportunity to grow up, because they are obviously far more dangerous than other pirates. Compared with other pirates' crew, their crew recruited people along the way and grew up slowly. As soon as they stepped into Grand Line's second island, they will be faced with the full encirclement and suppression of the Marine's massive forces. This will be an unavoidable and most dangerous encirclement and suppression. Only by escaping from this siege and suppression can they really stand firm on the Grand Line without any fear of capsizing at any time. Since they are coming for us and we can't escape, then let them come, I am not afraid of them. Ross responded calmly. As he said, since they can't avoid the Marines, then they must be prepared to face them, and this is not a desperate situation. On the contrary, this will be the beginning that will make the Marine headquarters fear him. I didn't want to become a pirate. You made me one. Now, I'm here. I don't know, but are you ready? Ross looked at the moving sea in the distance, his eyes flashed slightly, then he went into his cabin and went back to the practice room and began to exercise again. 5 days later, Ghost Shadow Ship arrived at the second island of the Grand Line, Elias Island, a large island with a country, the Kingdom of Elias. In the face of oppression, people can always stimulate more of their potential, perhaps because of the forthcoming decisive battle. Ross's physical fitness and hockey in these 5 days improved a lot. The otherwise unstable armament hockey has gradually stabilized and the failure rate of armament hockey hardening has become very low. As long as Ross is absolutely calm and focused, there will be almost no failure. This is only a short distance away from mastering armament hockey hardening thoroughly. And if he encounters a battle, this line will be quickly crossed. In the One Piece world, fights are always one of the most effective ways to stimulate your potential. It will take at least 1 week before the log pose can record and store the magnetic waves of this island. Looking ahead at the Elias Island, Lafitte glanced at the log pose worn on his wrist. No problem. Ross stood in front of the deck and looked at the island in front of him, instructing everyone to drive the ship to the west side of the Elias Island, below a cliff, and to drop the anchor there. The purpose of not stopping at the port is to avoid the direct bombardment of the Marines after the direct exposure of their ship at the port. Although he is not afraid of the bombardment, the Ghost Shadow Ship is different. Although the ship is very strong, but if the ship is bombarded with a large number of big cannons on the battleships, even if it is not sunk, it will be badly damaged. Can you go up? Ross looked up at the cliff about 30 meters above and asked Lafitte and Robin. Lafitte glanced up and said, no problem. This height, I can give it a try. Robin judged and responded slightly slowly. Oh, after Lafitte finished, he flicked his stick lightly and 2 white wings appeared behind him. With a flicker, he flew over the cliff. Devil fruit, what ability is it? Ross wasn't surprised to see this. It was Lafitte's ability in his memory, but he had no intention of asking. Cyan Fleur, wings. Robin watched Lafitte fly up. She took a deep breath, crossed her hands in front of her and started her ability. Suddenly, countless arms gushed out with the petals, joined together on her shoulders and formed 2 wings, and she flapped them hard and flew up. Robin's figure is perfect. Slender waist and slender legs are not to be criticized, but flying is hard for her, and it was obviously not because she was fat, but because the development of her devil fruit is not enough. Ross looked at the scene and shook his head slightly. Your fruit development is a bit poor, should we redevelop it? Ross said. Crash. Robin barely flew to about 25 meters, and finally could no longer control the wings composed of countless arms. The wings collapsed into petals and disappeared. However, instead of falling directly, she leaned on the edge of the cliff and prepared for it and made arms at the edge of the cliff, like a trestle, and stepped up step by step. Ross watched as Robin walked up like this, feeling that the plot seemed a little wrong, but he still silently retrieved his slightly open arms. Seeing that Lafitte and Robin had already boarded the island, Ross turned to the ship's handyman and said, you guys, if there's any trouble on this side, let me know immediately with Den Den Mushi. Den Den Mushi is so convenient for Marine to use. Ross naturally can't let it go. After Lafitte got on board, he has been searching and equipping them. Now there are 3 of them. 1 is placed on the ship and the other 2 are held by Lafitte and Robin. Yes. Captain. The handyman was awed by Ross. After Lafitte got on board, Ross let Lafitte hypnotize and brainwash their group. Their loyalty has basically reached the maximum value. Whiz. After giving the order, Ross leapt and made a few empty steps in the air. He used Geppo and rushed up towards the cliff in a flash. Lafitte and Robin were waiting on the edge of the cliff. "Robin and I will go, and Lafitte, you can act alone and keep in touch with us if anything happens," Ross said to Lafitte. "Yes, Captain." The wings on Lafitte's back have long since disappeared. He slightly smiled and put his cane behind his back and bows to Ross. The three of them walked towards the island and then separated on the edge of the Elias kingdom. At the same time, somewhere in the sea, led by 2 large battleships, plus 3 medium-sized battleship fleets are sailing at full speed on the sea, only 4 days away from the Elias Island. The Kingdom of Elias. This country is very developed in its services and is one of the most famous hot spring countries in the world. Various hot springs can be seen everywhere, and some world-famous people often come here to experience high-grade hot spring baths. In the independent corner of an upscale spa, there is a single spa room with a radius of about 45 meters. The facilities in the room are elegant and luxurious. Ross is lying quietly on the edge of the spa with his eyes closed. There are also largely shared hot springs outside, but he prefers separate hot springs pools. If Robin wants to come in, Ross will not mind. Since he became a pirate, he has rarely enjoyed leisure. When he was a pirate hunter in West Blue, he used to relax between hunting pirates, but now he spends most of his time on his ship sailing at sea. While Ross was relaxing and stretching, there was suddenly a depressed sound. Purru purru purru. Ross opens his eyes and walks out of the water. He grabs a clean towel and wipes himself. Then he goes towards his clothes and pulls out a den den mushi from the pocket. After the connection was established, Lafitte's voice came from Den Den Mushi. "Captain, I've found something that might be very useful here." "Oh? What is it?" Ross asked as he dressed. Lafitte hides in a corner and speaks into the Den Den Mushi in a slightly low voice. A special log pose, with 3 poses on it, it is said to be high-level log pose from the second half of Grand Line, which can point to 3 islands at the same time. Listening to Lafitte, Ross's eyes flickered slightly. He naturally knew about this kind of log pose, but he didn't expect to find one in the first half of the Grand Line. The question is, can this log pose be used in the first half of the Grand Line? But if you think about it carefully, the 3-arrow log pose itself is an upgraded version of the ordinary log pose, which can be used in the New World, so it is very likely that it can be also used in the first half of the Grand Line. "Where are you?" Ross asked Lafitte after a little thought. If the 3-arrowed high-level log pose works in the first half of the Grand Line, he will not be confined to a single route, so that even if a Marine Admiral wants to come after him, he must first determine his exact location. Beth Street. Lafitte's voice was vividly imitated by the Den Den Mushi. That log pose seems to have come from a private dark exchange, and now there's fighting between at least 3 groups of pirates. Obviously, Ross is not the only one who wants the Hig-level log pose. If it's available in the first half of the Grand Line, then it's one of the best navigational equipment for most pirates. "Watch it and wait for me." Ross heard Lafitte's words and quickly put on his clothes. He pushed open the door and went out. He said to Robin in the lounge, "Let's go to Lafitte." Robin put down the newspaper in her hand, looked blankly at the captain who had recently invited her to soak in the hot spring, then stood up and followed. Beth Street. The screams and the sound of gunfire went together, and a large number of people fled crazily. Some of them were well dressed and some were only covered with bath towels, but nobody cared much about it at this time. The streets have become a battlefield for several groups of forces, 3 of which were pirates and 1 was the local criminal organization, fighting in chaos. "Captain, you are here." Ross and Robin appeared at a roadway entrance, and Lafitte emerged from the darkness at the right time, lifting his cane and pointing in one direction. "The pirates over there now owns the log pose, and they are now under siege by 3 other groups. They tried to break through twice but failed. Now they have retreated to the 3-story building." "I see." Ross nodded. After looking at the building in the distance, he walked straight out of the lane and walked over to the 3-story building. By this time, the streets were already in a mess. Smoke and rubble were spread everywhere. Everyone was looking for shelter from guns. Few people were huddled together. Ross swaggered out and immediately attracted a lot of attention from people in several directions. "Captain, someone is coming." Hiding behind a bunker, a pirate captain looked at Ross at the street not far away. His eyes were shimmering with cold fury, and he said, "He is not one of our men, kill him." Bang! 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 At his command, 4 or 5 pirates around him immediately opened fire on Ross, and a heavy shower of bullets hit Ross head on. Strangely enough, Ross just turned his head a little and shrank his shoulders in the rain of guns and walked safely through it without a bullet hitting him. Not hit? The pirates were surprised. The pirate captain's eye flashed and he murmured, "No, the bullets were evaded. This fellow is not an ordinary person. Be careful. People who can avoid bullets are quick and agile. If he hadn't had a bounty of 50 million berries and had seen the strongest people in all walks of life, he would have withdrawn decisively by this time." Ross did not deal with the chaotic pirate and criminal organizations. His goal was to get the log pose first so that the pirates in the building would not jump into the wall and destroy the log pose and he gets nothing. After several rounds of bullet fire, Ross approached the 3-story building, where some people opened fire on Ross, but all were evaded by Ross. Damn it! Why can't you get hit? Because Ross did not show any overwhelming power. The pirates in the building were amazed, but they were not terrified enough to run away. Finally, Ross came to the bottom of the 3-story building and went straight through the main door. He clapped his hands on both sides and a series of bullets fired in the front changed their trajectory and hit back in the opposite direction. 2 pirates fell to the ground in a splash of blood. Whiz! Ross no longer concealed his speed and in a flash, he was upon the last pirate in the lobby on the 1st floor. With his foot on the pirate's chest, he calmly asked, "Where is the log pose?" With "Captain," the pirate saw 2 of his companions die without resistance and then he responded with a trembling voice to Ross's eyes, which had no feelings for life. "Where is your captain?" "Upstairs, 3rd floor." Ross loosened his legs indifferently and walked over him, heading for the 2nd floor. When Pirate saw Ross walking past him, his unprepared back was facing him and his fear subsided slightly. Instead, he gritted his teeth and grabbed the guns on the ground. Bang! But before he could aim the guns at Ross, the floor on the 1st floor was suddenly overturned by some strange force. From the 2 sides to the middle, it was instantly closed together and everything in the middle was squashed together. Ross did not look back, nor did he stop, and went up to the 2nd floor. There were 5 people on the 2nd floor. 3 guns and a portable cannon were all aimed at the stairway. At the moment Ross appeared, they fired at him. Bang! 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 More than a dozen bullets, together with a fist-sized cannonball, swept towards Ross, but strangely, all of them were fixed in the air at the moment they touched Ross. Is the ability? Hell! Several pirates on the 2nd floor were shocked when they saw this scene. One of them gritted his teeth and waved his sword and slammed into Ross. Bang! Ross raised his hand, his wrists leaving afterimage after them. He strokes the fixed bullets and cannonball and all the bullets and cannonballs were reflected back. Before the man's sword hit Ross, more than 10 bullets hit him, leaving 10 holes in his body. The sword in his hand was blown up by the cannonball and he was left there bleeding. When the remaining 4 pirates saw this scene, they were all shocked. Ross's strength was incredible. They were not his opponents at all. Without waiting for the 4 pirates in front of him, Ross kept walking towards the stairway leading to the 3rd floor. When he came to the stairway, the ceiling on the 1st floor surged under his feet, twisting violently and squeezing toward the center. Puff! The 4 pirates were wrapped up in it without any resistance and 4 popping sound was heard at the same time. Blood stained the walls and ceilings on the 2nd floor. Ross went towards the 3rd floor. "Captain, that guy is coming up." The 3rd floor is already in chaos. Although there are many people here, they have to deal with the guns and cannons firing at them from outside, and now they had listened to the terrible news from downstairs with shock and terror. The leader of the pirates, a man with a brown beard and a triangular cap, he calmly listened to the motions on the 2nd floor. He pulled an axe from behind him and said, "Don't panic." Whiz! Just as Ross walked up to the 3rd floor, the pirate captain held the axe in his hands and tried his best to attack him. An axe slammed down towards Ross. Before the axe fell, a strong wind that seemed to tear the flesh of human beings and make their skin crawl appeared. Nevertheless, in the face of this horrible axe, Ross had no intention of avoiding it at all. He just raised his hand and prepared to take the falling axe with one hand. Courting death. The brown-bearded pirate saw that Ross has the intent to block his axe with his bare hands and his eyes flashed angrily. He pushed his axe with all of his strength and the axe slams down towards Ross, planning to smash him into 2 pieces. And the instant that the axe touched Ross's palm, the violent wind was stifled by a strange force between the axe and Ross's palm. And the huge axe blade was directly frozen in the air as it was grasped by Ross with one hand. The axe couldn't even move forward by a single centimeter. The power contained in it was rigidly blocked down. "This is impossible." The brown-bearded pirate pupil violently contracted and his face showed a look of horror and incredulity. He had used his full power, which was enough to cut solid iron plates. He could even cut a solid wall with his axe, but the man in front of him actually blocked his axe barehanded. Without waiting for him to do anything again, Ross slightly pressed his 5 fingers and the axe suddenly twisted under the power of distortion. The power of distortion spread all the way down to the axe handle in the blink of an eye, turning the entire axe into scrap iron. Clang! Ross casually threw the scrap iron on the ground, and under the horrified gaze of the pirate captain, he stepped forward and lunged at his wrist with his fingers, taking away the log pose on it. Damn it! Seeing that he had been robbed by Ross and his crew has suffered heavy losses by Ross's hand, the pirate captain was angry and resentful as he said, "So what if you steal it? You are also trapped here and you can't get away. You don't need to bother about that, you are already useless to me." Ross looked at the 3-arrowed log pose in his hand and gently put it in his pocket, and then indifferently glanced at the pirate captain and his crew in front of him, lifting his foot. Buzz! The power of distortion erupted from Ross's foot and spread in all directions. It expanded from the 3rd floor to the 1st floor, covering the whole building in an instant. Then Ross raised his hand and suddenly clenched his fist in the void. Bang! Under the horror and fear-filled eyes of the pirates, the walls, ceilings, and everything were all twisted in a weird spiral, and the whole building suddenly twisted and squeezed toward the center. In the eyes of the other 3 forces outside who surrounded the building, they felt as if the building was suddenly grabbed by an invisible giant, with one of his hand holding the upper part of the building while the other hand holding the lower part and twisting the entire building. The whole building was squeezed into a ball-shaped structure. What happened? Looking at this scene, almost everyone's face showed a bit of horror. Even the pirates with 45 million berries bounties on their head were scared as they watched a 3-story building twisted and squeezed into itself. When the building was completely twisted into a ball, it remained suspended for a half-second before it suddenly exploded, turning into countless gravel splashing in all directions. Boom! Bang! Most of the buildings around the rubble collapsed, and 2 pirates and many members of the local criminal organization were smashed into a mess. The surroundings were destroyed almost instantaneously. It was when the building was completely destroyed that Ross emerged from it, without any blood or even any damage to his clothes, and landed on the ground in the middle of the street that had been destroyed, and he was almost completely exposed to the members of pirates and criminal organization. Looking at the figure in clean shirt and autumn cloak, with slightly wet hair and calm and indifferent eyes, everyone could not help but swallow their saliva and stare at each other. Without a doubt, it was this man who twisted the building into a mass of ruins. Although they did not know how he did it, the scene just now has shocked everyone. It seems that Captain has already succeeded. On the roof of a building not far away, Lafitte laughed as he avoided the splashing stones. Lafitte and Robin saw Ross in the middle of the street. The atmosphere in the field stagnant for a few seconds. Neither the members of the criminal organization nor the other 2 pirates did anything about it. Obviously, the scene just happened was too horrible for them to know whether to fight or retreat. But them not moving didn't mean that Ross would stand still. Just a few seconds later, Ross glanced calmly across the crowd and stepped forward. Bang! The power of distortion was poured into the earth, and the ground suddenly surged like a wave, spreading in all direction. The terrifying momentum shook the entire street. Hard rocks are much more difficult to twist and manipulate than sand, but Ross's current power of distortion still covers an area of tens of meters in a circle. What power is this? The remaining 2 pirate crew and the criminal organization members were hit hard, and all the surviving people were horrified, and they didn't think much before fleeing in all direction. The audience was shocked. Even Lafitte and Robin could not keep their faces calm watching the streets within tens of meters surge like waves. Watching the near-destroyed scene, the ordinary people and nobles fled to distant places. After a long time, it was not until the countless rocks that had been raised in the street fell back that everything was quiet, and Lafitte breathed softly and said, "It seems that following Captain Ross was the correct choice." On Beth Street, the top floor of a 4-story hotel. In front of a huge floor-to-ceiling window in the center of the hotel, a figure that looks like some kind of long ostrich is standing there wearing a high ceremonial hat, looking at the battlefield in the distance with great interest. Is it Ghost Hand Pirates? He is one of the emperors of the Dark World, President Morgan of the Great News Agency, who was associated with BIGMOM pirates and controlled a large number of news agencies and newspapers in the world, with whom even the world government had a little cooperation. He knows something about Ghost Hand Ross, who took some big actions in West Blue and stepped into the Grand Line, and he even specially arranged some small newspaper pages for him. So he has finally arrived in the Grand Line. He is quite strong. His gaze crossed several streets and his eyes were like that of a bird, staring at Ross's location and looking at Ross. Morgans looked for a few seconds and took a cup with his hand, sipping tea in his mouth, and turned to look at the border area of the kingdom of Elias, with a smile on his face. If he can survive this crisis, then the title of the most dazzling supernova in the first half of the Grand Line will belong to him. In the direction Morgans looked, there was a large amount of Marine rushing into the street. Marine G8 Fleet arrive in Elias, Beth Street. After killing a large number of pirates and criminal organizations members, Ross did not chase down the small fries that had been frightened and fled crazily but turned to Robin and Lafitte. After finding Lafitte and Robin on a roof, Ross took the log pose out of his pocket and threw it at Lafitte. See if it works. Lafitte accurately reached for it and looked at it and murmured, "It's impossible to judge it just by looking at it like this. We can't deduce it until our log pose's magnetism is fully stored. If the direction indicated by the single arrow log pose is one of the directions indicated by the 3-arrow high-level log pose, then it will be clear that the 3-arrow high-level log pose is usable and can be directed to 3 islands without being fixed on a single route. Then we will wait." Ross nodded. Before confirming that the high-level log pose can be used, it is impossible to throw away the original log pose and sail the sea. If that new log pose didn't work, then it will be a very troublesome thing. Just as Lafitte picked up the new log pose and put it on his other wrist, Robin, who was standing a little far from the building, suddenly rushed forward with a heavy face. "Captain, Marines are here." When Ross and Lafitte heard Robin's words, they looked in the direction Robin was pointing. They saw that there were a lot of Marines on the streets. The original chaotic streets were restored to order because of the arrival of Marines, but these Marines obviously did not come for the outbreak of battle here. Looking at the scale and level, they obviously had only one goal, that is ghost hand pirates. They are quite fast. Ross stood there, his eyes calm and indifferent as he looks towards the streets where a large number of Marines quickly surrounded the Beth Street. "Captain?" Lafitte turned to Ross, revealing a look that asked "fight or retreat?" Ross looked at the large number of Marines that surrounded him and his eyes flashed. He quickly made a decision and said, "You and Robin will go back to the ship. Let me try out the strength of these Marines." The Marine base on Grand Line is planning to attack him. They will most likely be led by a Vice Admiral, followed by Marine Rear Admirals and a large number of Marines elite and powerful lineup. Lafitte and Robin may be able to cope with a group of Marine elites, but the situation is bound to become very unfavorable in the face of the siege of Marine Rear Admiral and countless elite Marines. As for himself, he has no fear of the army tactics and he has a certain confidence in his own strength. Even if he cannot fight, it will not be a problem for him to retreat in such a mixed street. At this time, the speed advantage of Ghost Shadow ship is vivid. Even if they can't deal with the Marines, as long as they board the Ghost Shadow ship and retreat, Marines will only be able to watch the Ghost Shadow ship disappearing in the horizon with all her might. "Sorry, Captain, I want to play with these Marines a little," and Miss Intelligence will be able to return to the ship by herself. When Lafitte heard Ross's words, he shook his cane with a smile on his face. "Okay." Ross nodded calmly. The most prominent feature of Lafitte and Robin is that they don't get lost like Zoro and they won't get distracted by any beautiful women like Sanji. In most cases, they don't need to bother him. "Okay. You both be careful." Robin nodded calmly next to him. Lafitte and Ross were confident that they could get away from Marine's siege. Naturally, she would not stay to cause trouble. Besides, the Ghost Shadow ship needed her to take charges to prepare her for sailing at any time. Suddenly, Marine restored calm to the chaotic Beth Street and countless civilian and nobles were all settled down in town and no longer fled in panic. However, there are also many people who showed a strange expression. The battle just happened here and in less than an hour, Marine came. It was a little too fast. Normally, they didn't come until the fighting has finished and everyone has escaped. Have you discovered that there are a lot more Marines than normal? Someone watched the line of Marines move forward, occupying all the streets in all directions and surrounding the entire Beth Street. The man next to him seemed to have just recovered from the chaos. He shook his head and said, "Who knows? Maybe it's to protect somebody. After all, this is the most famous hot spring country in the world. Apart from Tenryubito, who disdains to live with ordinary people, many nobles like to come here for vacation and leisure." "No," someone shook his head and the light in his eyes twinkled. He said, "I'm afraid it's not as simple as protecting someone. Look over there, there is a Vice Admiral here." Looking in his direction, they saw a man in marine justice cloak with vice admiral's epaulets embroidered on his shoulders. He was walking in front of all marines with a fierce face. He is the Vice Admiral Dalmatian of Marine G8 branch. Behind Dalmatian, there were 3 Marine Rear Admiral. Rear Admiral Elias, you lead the 2nd team from the west. Rear Admiral Hez, you lead the 3rd team from the south. Rear Admiral Roma, you lead the 4th team from the north. You must lock all the Ghost Hands pirates in Beth Street area. Remember, once you find Ghost Hand Ross, don't fight, just report to me. Following Dalmatian's orders, the 3 rear admirals responded and swiftly turned around and sped away with their marine ranks without any hesitation. Dalmatian watched the 3 rear admirals go away calmly and then led the 1st team to the east entrance of Beth Street District, closing the last gap. Ghost Hand pirates, the pirates that gave so many headaches to Doberman, let's see if you are worth the effort. Dalmatian rubbed his fist as he walked with a slight grin on his face. He and Doberman became Marines at the same time. Doberman made more contributions than him and he became a Marine Headquarters Vice Admiral before him. But he was not far from that position. It will take him a year and a half at most to become a Vice Admiral of the Headquarters. He had heard about Ghost Hand Ross and he knew that one Headquarters Rear Admiral Onigumo had fallen by Ross's hands, so even if Ross only has a bounty of 92 million berries and he has just entered the Grand Line from West Blue, he would not be careless. There are 4 Rear Admiral in the base and he had bought 3 of them with him. Together with a large number of elite troops, he had bought nearly 3/4 of the forces of the G8 branch base with him. He will not give Ross an opportunity to escape and grow. At this time, Marines' goal is to wipe out the Ghost Hand pirates and they quickly spread out and covered the entire country. Ghost Hand pirates? Never heard of them. There is such a big movement to capture some unknown pirates? Someone looked at Marines and frowned. Someone snorted alongside him and said, "Do you think Marines are that idle and has nothing to do but deliberately deploy such a huge force? I have read about the Ghost Hand pirates in the newspaper. They are said to be the most ferocious pirates of West Blue. Even the fleet led by Headquarters Rear Admiral was defeated by him." Headquarters Rear Admiral's fleet was defeated? That's a terrifying guy. This piece of news surprised many people in the vicinity. Even ordinary civilians know that the rank of the Rear Admiral is a very high position and some can attain it. I'm afraid that it was the Ghost Hand pirates who made such a big move just now. The news spread everywhere. A large number of civilians and nobles were evacuated from Beth Street under Marines' escort. They had already run out because of the sudden outbreak so the evacuation was extremely easy. Bounty of 92 million berries. I did not expect that this level of pirate will appear here. It's a little scary, but fortunately I already got out. A Marine Vice Admiral has been dispatched. With such a huge force, these Ghost Hand pirates may not be able to live for long, so we don't need to worry about it. Some businessmen and aristocrats gathered together to talk about it. For them, pirates are their most hated existence, especially this level of pirates. Once the pirates attack them, they will be robbed and killed. Marines sent such a huge force, which undoubtedly made them feel calm. The scene of thousands of Marine soldiers surrounded the entire block is very shocking. Although the power displayed by Ghost Hand Ross was somewhat terrible, Marine has Vice Admiral with them. Even a pirate with the bounty of 200 million berries will not attract such force. Beth Street area. The people here have been already evacuated and the entire block has become oppressive. Marine, armed with swords and guns, keeps pushing along the street in a carpet-like manner. Rear Admiral Elias pulled out his sword and walked in front of the team with a solemn face. Keep your spirits up. Don't be careless. The pirates we are dealing with this time are not ordinary. Even if we have a large force, we may suffer heavy casualties. Yes. Many Marine soldiers responded. All of them knew about the Ghost Hand pirates, but they were not too afraid to walk behind a Rear Admiral and many Marines captains. As they walked for a while to a slightly darker block, Elias stopped at the front and stared sharply at a figure in front of them. "Ha, Rear Admiral? There's such a huge force. Get out here with your hands up." Elias pointed his sword at Lafitte. The official crew of the Ghost Hand pirates had a total of 3 people. Although Lafitte did not have a bounty, his appearance has long been photographed. Pointed at by countless guns, Lafitte did not show any signs of panic. Instead, he showed a strange smile and said, "What if I saw Idna?" Then, execution on the spot. Elias's eyes flashed and he used Soru to rush towards Lafitte. If he met Ross, he would immediately let his subordinates notify Dalmatian and be alert and delay for a time, But when he met a guy who didn't even have a bounty, he didn't have to be so cautious. However, Lafitte's method was somewhat unexpected. When he rushed to Lafitte and thrust a sword through Lafitte's body, he realized that he was only stabbing a piece of cloth. Huh? Elias stared a little and turned his head and saw Lafitte's figure behind the Marines, spinning his mahogany cane. Then something unexpected happened. Marines fired the guns in their hand at each other and killed them. Some of them rushed towards him and shouted, "Damn it! What did you do?" Elias looked angry as he didn't expect Lafitte to have such methods. He avoided the bullets from his subordinates and rushed towards Lafitte. Lafitte smiled and said, "Whoop, just a little hypnosis." Lafitte is entangled with Marines led by Elias, while Rear Admiral Hez, on the other hand, meets Ross, who is waiting quietly at an alley entrance. Seeing Ross, Hez's face showed vigilance and alertness. He also signaling his subordinates to inform Dalmatian. Then he pulled out 2 exquisite guns and pointed them at Ross. "Ghost Hand Ross, you are under arrest, don't resist, or you will be executed here." Ross looked at Hez with a blank expression. If Kizaru was in this position, he might raise his hands in surrender, but he remained calm. Ross didn't have much interest in fighting a rear admiral. A meaningless threat. He spoke calmly and gently and did not rush over. Instead, he opened his hands and pointed them towards Hez and the Marine while making a strangling motion with them. Bang! Suddenly, the earth cracked under the influence of the distortion fruit and spread far away. In Hez's area, several buildings on both sides collapsed and squeezed towards the center like rubber under the actions of the power of distortion. What the hell? Looking at the buildings on both sides of the street twisting and collapsing, many Marines holding guns in their hands showed a look of horror and a trace of fear in their eyes. Block. Block it. Even though the Marines were terrified, they still pulled out their swords, or some even went barehanded and charged into the collapsed building in an attempt to destroy and prop it up. However, even if they worked together, they still couldn't stop the collapse of the building, and the power of distortion was transmitted through the building and into their bodies, causing a sharp pain in their bodies. They felt as if their muscles have been separated. Rumble. As the building was twisting, the walls gradually collapsed and countless stones splashed down. The entire street seemed to squeeze into a ball. And at this moment, sword energy suddenly burst from the end of the street, splitting the squeezed street and leaving a crack on the ground. Whiz. A figure rushed into the street. He was short and stout, dressed in Marine Justice cloak, with Rear Admiral's shoulder band embroidered on his shoulder. It was Rear Admiral Roma of Marine Branch. "Hez, are you okay?" After Roma cut the collapsed building and rushed in, he shouted at Hez, who was trying to block the collapsed building. Hez rubbed his wrist and shook his head as he looked towards Ross in the distance with fear and said, "I'm all right. What about Vice Admiral Dalmatian?" "Almost here." Roma responded quietly and turned towards Ross, holding the handle of his sword in both hands and saying, "Let's stop him until Vice Admiral comes." Hez nodded as his expression returned to seriousness. He stood with Roma. Ross killed Headquarters Rear Admiral Onigumo. They also know that they were not as strong as Onigumo, much less Ross who killed him, but if they work together, they should be able to block him for some time. As long as Vice Admiral Dalmatian arrives, Ghost Hand Ross will be stopped. Escape? Ross looked at Roma in the rescue field with a calm expression. He didn't want to talk, but when he heard Roma's words, he couldn't understand something. He said, "What makes you think that I'm going to run away?" In this sea, in most cases, pirates run away when they meet Marines. Even if the Marines' force is not enough to defeat them, there are few pirates who would want to confront Marines. The reason for this result is that in this sea, pirate forces are as many as stars, and like stars, they are scattered, while Marine forces are a single entity. Even if some pirate kills the Marine who pursued them, it will only irritate Marine and they will chase him relentlessly, and the pursued pirate will lose his opportunity to fight with other pirates. Apart from the Revolutionary Army, there are few pirates who are confronting Marine and the government. Most of the time when pirates meet Marine, they will turn around and flees regardless of the strength of Marine's forces. But Ross is not one of the pirates mentioned above. When he meets Marine, his first reaction is never to run away but to confront the Marines. The main reason for this is because the Marines forced him into becoming a pirate. Moreover, the existence of the talent system makes Marine's contradiction with him irreconcilable. The only relationship between them is that of a hunter and his prey. Roma's expression changed slightly when he heard Ross's words. In the past, when a pirate met Marines, they ran away, but from Ross's attitude, he did not seem to have any intention of retreating, but he intended to confront them. Madman. This is Roma's evaluation of Ross, and his confrontation with Marine can no longer be described by the word rampant. In Roma's view, it is simply incomprehensible behavior. The next moment, Ross moved. With a gentle step under his feet, Ross used Soru and turned into a shadow. He suddenly charges towards Roma and Hez, with his left and right hands clenched, and attacked them separately. Here he comes. Watch out! Hez's intention was to confront Ross without retreating, but he was afraid as Ross wanted to fight them, which is incomprehensible, and he is strong enough to defeat them. When Ross rushed in, the two men, who had already been on guard, moved at the same time. Roma held a huge sword in both hands and broke out with a fierce sword attack against Ross's fist. One sword flow, power strike. At the same time, Hez accurately captured Ross's figure and jumped backward to avoid Ross's punch, while the two guns in his hands were firing at Ross with a series of seastone bullets that had just been filled in. Bang! The heavy blow from the giant sword collapsed under the power of distortion fist, and Roma flew backward. His arms were sore and the giant sword was completely twisted. As for the series of seastone bullets fired by Hez, Ross simply turned his head and shoulders slightly and avoided all the bullets. The seastone bullets, which have a weak effect in front of a strong hockey, can be avoided or blocked by both observation hockey and armament hockey. Some people's physiques are strong enough that the seastone bullets won't even be able to penetrate their skin. This is a Marine Rear Admiral on Grand Line? There seems to be nothing different. By performing some subtle moves, Ross is able to avoid the seastone bullets. He looks up calmly at Hez and suddenly disappears like a bubble. Watching Ross disappear suddenly, Hez was horrified. He only felt a chill on his back, and he did not hesitate to enter the state of kami-e, paper drawing, in Marine's Rokushiki. Whiz! The next moment, Ross appeared on his left side and punched. Hez was able to avoid Ross's frontal punch with kami-e, paper drawing, but half of his shoulder was still touched by Ross's fist. It was just a little scratch, but in less than a second, the power of distortion was poured into his shoulder, causing his entire shoulder to suddenly show a strange twist. Ah! Hez covered his arm and retreated with horror and fear in his eyes. At the same time, Roma, who supported him, saw the abnormal twist in Hez's shoulder and cold sweat flowed on his forehead. He slammed the giant twisted sword in his hand towards Ross. Ross didn't retreat. His eyes were calm and indifferent. He directly grabbed the sword blade with his hand, and the power of distortion surged from his hand as he squeezed the huge sword with his 5 fingers. Kacha! With a slight effort from his 5 fingers, the 2-meter-long sword broke off from the middle, and the rest of it was spirally twisted, spreading towards Roma. Roma did not hesitate to let go of his hand and retreat, but he was still a little bit affected by the power of distortion, and there was a sharp pain in the palm of his hand. He was shocked when he saw the dense blood inside his palm, which was heart-rending. Rear Admiral Roma. Rear Admiral Hez. Not far away, many Marine lieutenants and soldiers watched as Roma and Hez attacked Ross together, and seeing that both Rear Admiral wouldn't be able to defeat Ross, they were shocked. Roma and Hez's strength is second only to Elias and Vice Admiral Dalmatian in their G8 Marine base. In the past, even if they had more than a dozen elite Marines lieutenants working together against them, they were not Roma and Hez's opponents in training. Even a headquarters Rear Admiral won't be able to defeat them when they work together, but now they're being suppressed by Ross. The gap in strength is far too wide. In the panic, the Marine captain reacted and ordered the Marines to pull out their weapons and attack Ross. Quickly give them cover fire. Support Rear Admiral Roma and Rear Admiral Hez. Under orders, the Marines rushed up with weapons to attack Ross, even though their hearts were filled with fear and horror. After all, they were the elites of the G8 branch base. Ross calmly looked at the Marines who were rushing toward him. For Marine, he can remain neutral as long as they are not monsters in human form or provokes him, but all those who try to attack with him will be regarded as enemies. Ross will kill his enemies. Bang! Ross raised his legs and stepped on the ground under his feet. A power of distortions poured into the ground and spread in all directions with him as the center. Ross spread the power of distortion to the limit. Distortion. Whirlpool strangulation. In the next moment, the ground beneath Ross's feet suddenly moved and the thick bluestone bricks broke apart inch by inch, centering on Ross, and began to twist and rotate. 10 meters, 20 meters, 30 meters. The range of rotation expanded in all directions at an extremely fast rate until it becomes a circular area centered on Ross with a radius of nearly 50 meters, covering all the Marines who were trying to attack Ross. In a short period of time, the entire area, whether it was stone, mud or building, is turned into a wave-like whirlpool which rotated counterclockwise. What happened? What did that guy do? The ground is moving. After Marine noticed the abnormality of the ground and the buildings around them, their hearts began to feel a kind of inexplicable fear. The initial speed of the ground rotation is not fast, but it gradually becomes faster. In a short second, many Marines can't keep standing up and they fall on the cracked and moving ground. 2 seconds. Many buildings in all directions began to collapse one after another. 3 seconds. With Ross as the center in the circular area of 50 meters, everything is completely turned into a mud-like whirlpool. The earth is cracked and no good road can be seen. All the stones are broken into small pieces and surged like debris flows. 5 seconds. All the buildings collapsed and turned into rubble. Many Marines couldn't even scream out as they were buried in the mud-like ground and many broken limbs and bones could be seen. Some lieutenants struggled reluctantly in the whirlpool but they could not escape it at all. As for the two Rear Admiral, Hez and Roma, although they have the intention to stop Ross, both of them have an injured arm. In this whirlpool, they are only able to protect themselves. They can only watch as this piece of land become a grinding disc that smashed everything and took many lives away. 50 meters away. There were also many Marines gathering here but at this moment all of their faces were fearful and frightened and no one dared to step into the whirlpool at all. How short is the time of 5 seconds? All the Marines watched as everything in the 100-meter area turned into ruins, crushing and rotating everything, which is a shocking scene that is difficult to describe in words. 7 seconds. The vast majority of Marine captains and soldiers died, leaving only 2 or 3 Marine captains and Roma and Hez who still had some strength to support themselves. Finally, just as time passed to the 8th second, a roar came from a distance. Damn, stop it! Almost at the moment when the roar fell, a figure rushed into the whirlpool and attacked Ross with his black fist which was coated in armament hockey hardening. Marine Vice Admiral, Dalmatian is here. Faced with armament hockey coated punch, Ross wasn't surprised and he remained calm. As early as Dalmatian roared, his observation hockey had accurately captured his every action. Ross retrieved the power of distortion that had been poured into the ground beneath his feet and quickly shifted the power of distortions to his arms. His fingers clenched into a fist as the power of distortions converged on them, faintly showing a visible twisted curve, and he confronted Dalmatian. Bang! The armament hockey-coated punch and the power of distortion-coated punch clashed with each other. Almost instantly, a sonic boom was heard and the turbulent waves swept away in all directions, covering the entire Beth Street area and even affecting the battlefield where Lafitte and Elias were fighting. In the aftermath, many ordinary Marine soldiers who were too close could hardly keep themselves at their original position, but they couldn't open their eyes. It seems that your Vice Admiral finally reached my captain. Lafitte grabbed the brim of his hat with one hand to keep it from blowing away and looked at the Rear Admiral Elias with a light smile. Elias was covered in blood but none of it belonged to him but came from his Marine subordinates. He looked at the huge collision in the distance and slightly narrowed his eyes and coldly said, "It looks like it, your captain will be finished soon and you will also die." "Oh, I'm afraid that's not necessarily true." Lafitte raised a strange smile on his face and said, "Maybe it's you who will be finished, Mr. Rear Admiral." Elias did not react at Lafitte's words. Instead, he calmly stared at Lafitte and indifferently said, "No, you're wrong. You don't know the power of Vice Admiral Dalmatian at all. If you did, you'll never say anything like that. You'll only feel despair." The aftermath rippled away. The whirlpool stopped and the area around Ross stopped spinning. The entire street was silent. The ground in the entire area is full of bright red color, among which are the bones of dead Marines. In the middle of the area, Ross is standing there in a punching position and opposite to him stands Marine Vice Admiral Dalmatian, also in a punching position. The fists of the two men were against each other, trembling constantly, apparently in a struggle. Finally, Ross swayed and stepped back 2 steps while Dalmatian also stepped back, his arms shaking slightly and he could not see who had the upper hand. Dalmatian came angrily and tried his best to interrupt Ross's slaughter, but in the end, he could only interrupt Ross's whirlpool strangulation and he did not gain any advantage, which made him a little surprised. Vice Admiral Dalmatian, Roma and Hez survived Ross's attack and looked between the confrontation between Ross and Dalmatian. Dalmatian stopped Ross's attack and they were relieved and felt as if they were given a new life. Dalmatian stared coldly at Ross, signaling Roma and Hez to step back. Roma and Hez looked at each other and quickly stepped aside to deal with their injuries. Vice Admiral Ross, who had stepped back 2 steps, looked calmly at the Dalmatian in front of him and glanced at his shoulders, which held a high-level badge representing a Marine Vice Admiral. Coming from a small area of West Blue, it took him nearly 2 years to face a Vice Admiral. He relied on his own efforts and worked step by step to reach this stage. Dalmatian looked around and he saw a startling sight. Even though he had chased countless pirates and seen many villages slaughtered by pirates, he could not keep his calm when he saw this scene. It is reasonable that headquarters will define you as the most ferocious and dangerous pirate. Such cruel means, I will never let you go to sea again. Dalmatian's heart was burning with anger and he coldly stared at Ross. Listening to Dalmatian's words, Ross has no fluctuations in his heart. Those who dare to attack him will be regarded as enemies by him, and he will not give any kindness to his enemy. It was Marines who brought me to this point, isn't it? Ross looked at Dalmatian calmly. Upon hearing this sentence, Dalmatian's face became gloomy. As a Marine Vice Admiral, he has access to much inside information. When he received orders to deal with Ross, he also received all the information about Ross. In fact, he did not think that Doberman's choice and judgment were wrong, but no one could have imagined that an ordinary West Blue pirate hunter that killed a Marines branch captain would grow up at unimaginable speed and become a more and more troublesome existence for Marine. It's no use talking more, let's just fight. Dalmatian did not want to think about it anymore. After he spoke calmly to Ross, he stepped down and rushed towards Ross. As a master of body and hockey, Dalmatian's speed is very fast. In only a few seconds he rescued Roma and Hez while crossing several streets and simultaneously attacked Ross and made him stop his whirlpool strangulation. Whiz! Almost in an instant, he closed the distance between him and Ross and punched Ross's face. Ross's heart is always calm, and in this calm state, observation hockey can be used to its limit. Although Dalmatian's speed is much faster than his, but with observation hockey, he can still react to it. Boom! This is the second confrontation between Ross and Dalmatian. Dalmatian used a full speed raid, while Ross counter-attacked with frontal confrontation. When their fists collided, Dalmatian's hockey failed to reach the limit. Ross's power of distortion was able to mobilize a few points and the match was equally good. However, this time, Ross did not let Dalmatian take the initiative, but at the end of the fight, the power of distortion was completely stimulated and the fists were quickly swept out and directed at Dalmatian. Dalmatian snorted and did not have the slightest fear. Both of arms were coated with armament hockey hardening as he faced Ross. Bang! 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 In the fight, Ross gradually recovered from the state of an excessive explosion and the power of distortion began to play wantonly. After more than a dozen punches, Dalmatian's armament hockey apparently began to fail and completely broke by a stiff shook. Dalmatian's hockey and strength are better than Onigumo, but since he is not a swordsman, his attack power is not much stronger than Onigumo. Compared to it, Ross's current strength is already a lot stronger than when he faced Onigumo. Even as he was attacked by Dalmatian, he responded in a hurry. Even standing still, he can still repel Dalmatian attacks. Dalmatian, who was repelled by Ross, felt a slightly sore feeling in his arm. His face changed. Looking at Ross, he revealed a thoughtful expression. Distortion fruit, I didn't expect you to develop this fruit to this extent. He had once seen the power of distortion fruit before. He had killed a pirate with this devil fruit when he was still a captain. At that time, this devil fruit has caused him some trouble, but it was only trouble and not something he couldn't deal with. Now, over the years, his strength is tens of times stronger than it was before, but when the fruit reappears and falls into Ross's hands, it exerts far more power than the pirate he once met. You seem to have seen the power of this fruit. Ross responded calmly and his heart didn't seem to have any emotions. Devil fruit will reappear somewhere in the world within a few years after its last user had died, so it is normal for the distortion fruit to have previous users. Yes, that guy was a lot weaker than you. It's hard to develop such a weak fruit to this level, Dalmatian said indifferently. No, Ross said gently, you're wrong. There's no weak fruit. Any devil fruit can become strong, it just depends on the person who had eaten the fruit. Naturally, the ability to develop the power of distortion fruit to this level is inseparable from his own hard work. Whiz! The moment his voice fell, Ross suddenly charges into Dalmatian and launched a bold counterattack. Even though Dalmatian is faster than him, with the observation hockey, he can catch his opponent's actions in advance, and even if his speed is slower than Dalmatian, he can still keep up. Distortion fist. Ross clenched his fingers and punched. Dalmatian coldly looked at Ross. Even though Ross's punch was more powerful than before, he did not show any fear. You aren't the only one who has eaten a devil fruit. Buzz. Almost instantly, a force surged out of Dalmatian's body and his skin suddenly changed into a black and white speckle. His ears also lengthened downward, hanging on both sides of his cheek, and became two long strips of ears. At the same time, his upper body muscles also swelled for a half circle. Zone Devi fruit. Model Inu. Dalmatian form. As one of the weaker zone dog devil fruits. The ability of this devil fruit can bring about a limited increase, but ultimately there is a certain improvement, especially for Dalmatian. He has a strong physical body and hockey, so this increase is an all-around improvement. Vice Admiral is using his. Even Vice Admiral can't deal with that guy without using his devil fruit abilities, but in the form of a semi-dog, Vice Admiral's strength and speed are not comparable to what they were before. Roma and Hez have handled their injuries simply and are standing nearby, blocking Ross's possible escape route. They can't resist Ross's power, but they don't need to resist for long at all. It will only take a moment for Dalmatian to catch up if Ross tries to run away. In the field, Dalmatian, who has become a semi-dog, has turned his fingers into a half-claw and half-hand form. He clenches his fist and the armament hockey hardens his whole arm in an instant as he went up against Ross's fist. The two fists suddenly collided in the air. This time, both sides went all out and exerted their strength to the limit. An explosion occurred and the fragmented land in the center of the two men once again cracked. This time, Ross didn't retreat and his body shook slightly, while Dalmatian staggered and took a step backward. Obviously, the full power of the distortion fruit is still higher than his half-dog form. This scene fell into the eyes of Roma and Hez and others, and they all a little surprised. They didn't expect Dalmatian to lose in this battle. No wonder that Onigumo was defeated by your hands, you really are skilled. Dalmatian opened his mouth and said in a deep voice, and his eyes were fierce. He retreated half a step, and at the moment he retreated, he bent his finger and snapped at Ross. Shigen, finger gun, puff, puff. Two holes appeared in Ross's shirt at the chest area instantly, revealing a pale skin inside, but the Shigen, finger gun, which is more powerful than bullet, was annihilated by the power of distortion when it touched Ross's body. Distortion. Flash. Ross ignored Dalmatian's Shigen, finger gun, and swiftly shifted his fist and swung out. From his finger appeared a ray of light which instantly made Dalmatian close his eyes. Whiz. Ross rushed in close to Dalmatian and punched him. As a master of physical and hockey, Dalmatian naturally has the observation hockey, but this sudden flash caught him off guard and he couldn't avoid Ross's punch. He can only rush to put his fists on his chest and cast armament hockey on them. Boom! Under Ross's punch, Dalmatian flies backward, and even under armament hockey his arms stiffened and had soreness in them. Damn! He cursed as he could not open his eyes. He could only sense Ross's actions and respond to them by utilizing observation hockey. Ross rushed up against Dalmatian and continued to punch him. Undoubtedly, the power of distortions used with his fists is the most effective way to deal with the strong opponent who had a strong body and hockey, and the other means are more suitable for creating opportunities. Bang! 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 Dalmatian and Ross fought several times in succession and his arms became numb. He knew that it was not going well and jumped up by using Geppo. However, Ross snorted and also used Geppo and rushed up in the air and chased after him and continued to punch Dalmatian. Rankyaku, Tempest Kick. Ross is stronger than Dalmatian expected. Although his eyes have recovered, he still has some headaches in the face of Ross's air pursuit. He decisively used Rankyaku, Tempest Kick, and kicked towards Ross's head, but Ross stopped his attack and turned it into a ball which he threw back at Dalmatian. Boom! Dalmatian swings his fist and smashes the ball-shape energy thrown by Ross, but he also falls into a passive position. As Ross continues to chase him, he gets a straight punch on his shoulder. Even though he used armament hockey hardening on his shoulders to resist the punch, Ross's tyrannical power of distortion still invaded the inside of his shoulder, leaving his arm completely numb and immovable. Whiz! Dalmatian didn't think about it and immediately landed on the ground. Ross would use Geppo to fight him in the air. It was obviously a foolish choice because he needed to use his power to swing his fist, and his power has already halved. Ross's devil fruit ability can ignore everything. Whether it's hockey or just simple strength, it can break them all, and the strength of his punch is similar on the ground as well as in the air. Whiz! Seeing that Dalmatian fell, Ross did not hesitate to follow him, and both of them landed on the ground at the same time, and at the moment of landing Ross raised his foot and the ground under Dalmatian's feet suddenly collapsed in distortion. Power of distortion can be transmitted directly through the earth, and as the distance increase, the power of distortion weakens, so it will not have any effect on Dalmatian, who has a strong physical body, but it is suitable for catching enemies by surprise. Dalmatian was caught off guard by a sudden drop in the soles of his feet. Ross stepped forward and rushed up. Dalmatian could not avoid him and was forced to defend himself with his better arm. Bang! Ross dropped a punch and Dalmatian flew backward again. His one arm was heavily numb and the other arm was slightly better, but it was too hard to clench his fist. Ross's ability to use light was something that his observation hockey had failed to warn him off, so after Ross caught him off guard, he decisively seized the opportunity and forced him into retreat. After being attacked again, Dalmatian had some difficulties in dealing with Ross's offensive. He could only escape halfway and try to recover his arm strength by avoiding him. Ross could not give him a chance to recover and pursued him. How could this be? He caused the Vice Admiral to retreat. Many Marines watched as Ross caused a Vice Admiral to retreat, which was unbelievable for them. Dalmatian is undoubtedly the strongest person in the G8 branch. Even if the other Rear Admiral joined forces to attack him, they would not be Dalmatian's opponent. But now in the whole battle from the beginning to the present, Dalmatian did not seem to have the upper hand, and he has always been suppressed by Ross. What, even the Vice Admiral can't resist him? If it went on like this, then I'm afraid that the situation will be dangerous. Seeing that Dalmatian is having some difficulties facing Ross's fierce offense, Roma and Hez looked at each other and charged into the battlefield as fear gripped their hearts. With the addition of Roma and Hez, Dalmatian, who was about to lose, finally got a breathing opportunity, but it was only a slight one. If Dalmatian, Roma, and Hez were not injured, they would be able to cope with Ross at their peak power. But now Roma and Hez are half disabled and Dalmatian is also in a difficult position because of the special effect of the power of distortion. Even if they work together against Ross, it will be difficult to reverse the situation. Bang! 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 Even though Ross is facing 3 enemies, his eyes are indifferent and there are no signs of retreat. His attacks are getting more and more fierce. Especially the injured Roma and Hez can't stop Ross's power. If Ross's attack grazes them, they will end up puking blood. During this period, Marine captains tried to rush in to support them, but even Roma and Hez were barely able to participate. The Marine captains simply did not qualify to join in on such battle, and in a flash, they fell on the spot. For Ross, with the power of distortion, once he gains the upper hand, the opponent has almost no chance of counterattack. He will only fall into the wicked cycle where his arms get gradually destroyed by the power of distortion, which makes it increasingly difficult to exert force. Watching Ross take on 3 enemies, relying on his own strength to completely suppress Roma, Hez, and Dalmatian, all the Marines are scared and their eyes revealed an incredible look in them. Ghost Hand Ross is too strong. The 2 Rear Admiral of the G8 branch base together with Vice Admiral Dalmatian are in a losing position and they can't seem to turn the situation around. At this time, the remaining Marines can only look at them. They are not qualified to intervene in such battle. Finally, after beating Dalmatian back with 1 punch, Ross grabbed Roma's split sword with his hand and shook the sword for some time as the power of distortion spread all over Roma's body and he died a horrible death. Then, under Hez's horrified eyes, Ross stepped in front of him and kicked him in the chest, sending him directly to the building behind him, but he died before hitting the building. 2 Rear Admiral are instantly killed. Dalmatian was stunned, but it was too late for him to provide support. He tried to take this opportunity to attack Ross from behind and kill Ross with his punch, but after kicking Hez, Ross punched him back. Bang! Dalmatian could no longer resist the collision between their 2 fists. Armament hockey on his fist was crushed by Ross's power of distortion and the bones in his arm broke completely. Dalmatian endured the severe pain in his arm and tried to fight back with his other arm as he punched toward Ross, but Ross didn't give him a chance. With a backhand punch, Dalmatian's other punch was smashed and his bones completely disintegrated. Marine Vice Admiral's head, I accepted it. Ross calmly said as his fingers held a knife and he swung it horizontally, without any blood splashing. A head flew into the sky. His face was still shocked. Dalmatian predicted that Ross would be difficult to deal with. After all, even Onigumo lost to Ross, but he had no idea that even though he brought 3 Rear Admirals with him to the siege and suppression, he still ended up with such a tragic defeat. The audience was silent. Dong! This is the sound of a flying head that fell on the ground. In the silence, a sea breeze blew. Ding dong. This is the sound of marine swords falling to the ground. The first sound, then the sound sounded one after another. No one knows how many weapons fell off the hands, but the sound continues to echo in the quiet street. This is really big news. On the street 100 meters away, on the window of the top floor of a hotel, the cup in the hands of Morgan fell silently to the ground and turned into countless pieces. A frontal defeat of an entire Marine branch elite troops, killing a Marine's vice admiral and 2 rear admiral alone. Such strength may not be much in the Grand Line, but Ross is only a newcomer to the Grand Line. Looking at Ross, Morgan faintly felt that he had just seen the rise of the most dazzling supernova of this era, and he even hoped that this person will be able to shake the new world Yonko, 4 emperors, in the future. It's time to collect information and prepare a news report. West side of the Beth Street area. Lafitte's figure jumped up on the top of a 2-story building. There was a trace of blood on his mouth, but like always there was a strange smile on his face, which was white enough to make millions of beautiful women feel ashamed of themselves. It made anyone who saw him feel horrified. On the street, Elias was barely standing with his sword. His condition was much more miserable than Lafitte's. There were scars all over his body and his clothes were already dyed red. Other than that, the streets were full of Marines' bodies, some of them died by Lafitte's hand, but most of them were killed by Elias. Apparently, the soldiers were under Lafitte hypnosis. If Elias had not been very similar to Onigumo, Doberman, and others, he would have already collapsed in this battle. Whoop, killing your men, that's a terrible rear admiral. Instead of wiping the blood from the corners of his mouth, Lafitte smiled weirdly and stared down at Elias and whirled his red cane with ease. Elias looked up at Lafitte, his eyes were cold and indifferent as he said, "They died in order to not let you continue to endanger the sea." Whiz. The moment his voice fell, Elias jumped onto the roof and a sword fell on Lafitte, who had been prepared to dodge the attack. Nothing more had happened, the battle over there seems to be over. After avoiding Elias's sword, Lafitte did not fight back but turned to look at the center of Beth Street, where Ross and Dalmatian and others were fighting, and the violent noise that has not stopped from the beginning stopped. Elias did not turn around to look, but he also noticed that there was no movement there. He stared at Lafitte and said indifferently, "It seems that your captain has died. You are a little stronger than I expected, but you can't escape. It seems that you have a lot of confidence in your chief, but just like you, I am also very confident about my captain." Lafitte laughs. Elias was actually worried about Dalmatian's ability to defeat Ghost Hand Ross, but Roma and Hez had not come to support him so far, which clearly showed that besides Dalmatian, there were Roma and Hez on the battlefield. Ghost Hand Ross is not a big pirate with a bounty of 200 million berries. His vice admiral is stronger than him and the 2 rear admirals are somewhat weak, but this lineup is enough to deal with Ross. The only problem is his side. Although Lafitte was not much better than him in the frontal battle, the other side used strange methods to make him consume his stamina faster, and he also suffered a lot of injuries. Now he was only fighting him to delay him and not to win. But the battle over there is over, and if he drags his fight a little longer then help will arrive, and he is sure that he will be able to cope for a short time. With that in mind, he stared at Lafitte and continued to attack. But, almost at this moment, a voice was heard. "You are not finished yet, Lafitte." "I am very sorry, Captain, but I am almost finished." Lafitte turned his head and apologized in the direction of the sound. Elias's expression solidified. His head was a little stiff when he twisted it, and when he saw Ross, his heart could no longer remain calm and his eyes showed an incredible look. How can it be? How did Ghost Hand Ross appear here? Aren't Vice Admiral Dalmatian, Roma and Hez joining forces in the siege? How could he come here? He had a terrible idea in his mind, but he could not believe it at all. But Ross was standing behind him and Dalmatian and Roma did not appear and did not catch up. "I say, you seem to be distracted." Lafitte's voice interrupted his thoughts. He did not know when Lafitte appeared next to him, holding the mahogany cane and stabbing his heart. Elias tried to dodge in panic, but it was too late. Although he avoided the heart, he was still penetrated by Lafitte's mahogany cane. Elias suddenly understood why the headquarters was so serious when it issued the order and even said that they could postpone the attack and unite the forces of the 2 branches for encirclement and suppression. At that time, Dalmatian and their group of rear admiral thought that it was unnecessary. Now it seems that they have miscalculated and underestimated the strength of the Ghost Hand pirates. Although there are not many Ghost Hand pirates and only 3 official crew members, Their strength cannot be measured by the number of crew members alone. Goodbye. Lafitte pulled out his cane and sent it forward again. The cane passed through Atheus's heart precisely. When it was pulled out again, Atheus's body slowly fell to the ground. Watching the last Marine Rear Admiral fall to the ground, Ross looks thoughtful and thought that he may be able to put observation hockey's notes into practice again and give them to Robin and Lafitte. Marine Headquarters. In an office near the top floor, 3 Headquarters Vice Admiral were sitting on chairs and sofas, one of whom was Doberman and the other 2 were Manga and Yamakaji. Dalmatian people have already found the ghost hand pirates and they should have handled it in by now. Is it unstable to have the G8 branch base solely responsible for the ghost hand pirates? Yamakaji sat there and asked Doberman on the other side. Doberman hasn't answered yet. Manga, who has been keeping his eyes closed, opened his eyes and said, Dalmatian's strength is not far from us. This time he mobilized 3 rear admirals in the base. It is the most prudent response. Doberman murmured, it takes at least a month for the other branch bases nearby to reach the sea under the responsibility of the G8 branch. If we wait, the possibility of accidents will be even greater. Now we can only place our hopes in the G8 branch. I hope Dalmatian will not let us down. Doberman didn't mind going out in person to deal with Ross unless the journey was too far away, but it would probably take at least 2 months for him to lead the army to find Ross from headquarters. Therefore, it is the best choice to send out emergency troops from the G8 branch. Waiting. The Den Mushi on the desk rang and the 3 Headquarters Vice Admiral in the room suddenly became serious. Doberman walked to the desk and picked up the microphone to answer it. I am Headquarters Vice Admiral Doberman. Dang dang. This is the sound of the microphone falling on the red oak table and colliding with the table, which echoes in the quiet office. Manga and Yamakaji were startled. What happened? Doberman's fingers slightly trembled and he did not know whether it was from anger or from shock. The expression on his face was hard to describe in words and he fell back a step. When Manga and Yamakaji saw this, they couldn't guess what had happened. Manga stood up and took over the microphone that had fallen off the table. At the same time, Yamakaji came to Doberman. Is it the annihilation of the ghost hand pirates? Did the siege fail? Doberman seemed to use all his strength to suppress the feelings in his heart and went to the sofa next to him. He was in an extremely unstable state. The encirclement and suppression failed. Dalmatian and 3 rear admirals all died in battle. When he uttered the information he had just heard in a very depressed tone, he suddenly felt an irrepressible emotion in his heart. Why? Why did things go so far? It was just a small person, but again and again, that small person has defied all odds and became someone who is out of their control. Now they can't seem to do anything to him. Captain Moby told him that the situation was under control. Rear Admiral Bastille told him that Ghost Hand Ross would soon be sent to the judicial island, Eni's lobby, for trial. Onigumo told him that he would be back soon. Dalmatian told him that he would not give Ghost's hand pirates any chance. Inexplicable. He thought of what Ross had said from West Blue. Although right now I am just an insignificant nobody and about whom maybe you wouldn't care even a bit, but please remember what I say. Your behavior today determines the future direction of this sea. I hope that one day in the future, you would not regret the order issued today because by then everything will be too late. The sentence that was relayed by the division's lieutenant commander echoed in his ear, making him see Ross standing in front of him, stating it in a calm voice with a calm face. Regret? Doberman was in a trance for a moment, but he was a headquarters vice admiral after all. The next moment he recovered and his eyes became clear again. Yes, there are some regrets. Regrets that he did not pay attention to it earlier. He did not send Onigumo to West Blue earlier. He did not destroy the Ghost Hand pirates in the sea earlier. Doberman, we need to initiate a conference. When Manga heard the report from the Den Mushi on the other side, he hung up the Denmushi and was silent for a moment. He turned to Doberman, took a deep breath and said with a serious expression. Doberman and Momonga looked at each other and finally nodded and Yamakaji sighed and nodded. I will report it. Usually, only at Shichibukai's pirate level can headquarters be eligible to hold separate meetings for them. But now the situation is that the G8 branch base is almost completely extinct. The reconstruction and reassignment of the G8 branch base alone involve too many problems, not to mention the follow-up treatment of the Ghost Hand pirates. The Kingdom of Elias. The remaining Marines of the G8 branch base, under the direct command of the headquarters, took their battleship and evacuated the Kingdom of Elias. Ross, Lafitte, and others continued to stay on the island, waiting for log posts to record the magnetism, while Ross wrote down his understanding of observation hockey in accordance with his own practice route. I don't know if you understand the power of hockey. I have compiled my perceptive information on observation hockey. You can have a look. In a living room, Ross handed Lafitte and Robin the sorted information, which contained 4 pages, and it was much more detailed than the one he had originally obtained. Armament hockey cannot be practiced by them right now, but the threshold for practicing observation hockey is low. Some people even have a natural sense of seeing and hearing, and Robin and Lafitte's fighting style is more suited for the observation hockey. Hockey? I've read about it in the literature. It's said that there are 3 kinds. Robin received the sensational information from Ross. O'Hara's is the birthplace of all knowledge in the world. She has read about hockey, but it is something similar to popular science books. After Robin looked at it, she quickly wrote down the contents with her perfect memory. When she had learned everything in it, she handed the information to Lafitte. After Lafitte took it, he looked at it and suddenly shrugged his shoulders. According to this information, I seem to already have this ability, and forget when it will be used, Although I haven't understood your abilities, I wouldn't be surprised if you could already use it. Ross nodded, and he was not surprised. As a crew member of the Blackbeard Pirates in the original series, how could he not have some talent? He had noticed several times that Lafitte might be able to use it, but he never asked. Lafitte didn't lose the information. He laughed and then continued to look at it. He remembered it carefully. He carefully remembered that although he could use the sense of seeing and smelling, he could only use the power instinctively. There were also many flaws in the manipulation, just like Ross, who had just awakened his hockey and had not yet mastered the sense of seeing and smelling thoroughly. While Lafitte and Robin pondered over the observation hockey's data, Ross sorted out the harvest from the defeat of the G8 branch base. Dalmatian and 2 Rear Admiral were killed, and his arm was bruised by the other party's armament hockey. Fortunately, it didn't hurt his bones and muscles. He had been asking Robin to help apply the medicine for 2 days, and he had almost recovered. I better recruit a ship doctor soon. Ross's eyes flashed, and then he called up the talent system page. The Marines of the G8 branch base was defeated. Although 3 Rear Admiral and 1 Vice Admiral were defeated, the reward for defeating Marines is different from that of hunting pirate. Not all of them are superimposed, but only the highest chief of the team is counted. Ross got 100 talent proficiency points and 1 free talent point. Looking back at his fight with the Vice Admiral, Ross did not hesitate and put 10 talent proficiency points on the distortion fruit. Buzz. A golden glow flashed as the proficiency of the distortion fruit reached 300 points. At the same time, the gravity distortion branch became Green's activatable state, and the activation conditions were also displayed, requiring 3 free talent points. Sure enough, it requires more than 1 point, but 3 talent points are too much. Ross rubbed his eyebrows. He now has 2 free talent points. He can't activate the ability of gravity distortion. Besides, gravity distortion needs 3 points, and the space distortion will require even more. In the future, free talent points really needs to be saved. After hesitating, Ross did not continue to add points to the distortion fruit. Instead, he switched the interface to the general department. After looking at the remaining 90 talent proficiency points, he assigned 25 points to the physical enhancement and 50 points to the agility enhancement. The talent page of the general department has changed. Agility enhancement. 150, high-level strengthening. Physical enhancement. 260, top-level strengthening. In his previous battle with Dalmatian, Ross's speed was not as good as the other side. He relied solely upon the unexpected opportunities created by distortion fruit to carry out the fight. If Dalmatian had the advantage of speed, it would not be easy for him to win. In fact, the battle seemed to be a crushing victory because Marines made many mistakes in decision-making. One of them was that Marine miscalculated Lafitte's power. Otherwise, with 3 Rear Admiral teaming up with Dalmatian would have caused Ross to escape a head-on battle. The second is that 2 Rear Admirals were too stretched trying to confront Ross in a frontal assault, and they were badly injured by Ross, each of whom had discarded an arm, greatly reducing their strength. Thirdly, Dalmatians fought poorly as he was influenced by Ross's fierce tactics and words. If Dalmatian had used all advantages, then he would have won. No matter which one of these 3 problems were handled well, it will not be a complete defeat, and they wouldn't get completely destroyed by Ross. This time, Marines' encirclement was indeed cautious enough, and there were many troops. However, their strategy was too poor. The choice of separate encirclement and suppression led to the destruction of the regiment. Naturally, Now with 50 points in agility enhancement and 25 points in physical enhancement and 10 points in distortion fruit, Ross has improved a lot compared to his previous strength. Even if Dalmatian and the two rear admirals come at him with their full strength, they will not gain the upper hand. For the remaining 15 talent proficiency points, Ross thought a little and did not put them into physical enhancement or in distortion fruit, but switched back to the battle interface and put them in observation hockey. His observation hockey was somewhat slow in capturing the action of Dalmatian. If he encounters a person who is faster and more physically better than Dalmatian, he is likely to fall into a disadvantage, so he must improve this talent. Ross does not pursue speed advantage, but he cannot be at a disadvantage, otherwise, the impact on battle will be too big. Firearms shooting. 50 close combat fighting, 100. Distortion fruit. 300 Soru of Marines Rokushiki, 0. Kami-e, paper drawing, of Marines Rokushiki, 0. Marines Rokushiki's Geppo, moonwalk, 0. Observation hockey. 15 armament hockey, 0. If my physical ability can keep up, it will be fine to put 100 points on the distortion fruit at once. Ross perceives the changes in the body and muttered. However, after the power of distortion reached 300 points, it was apparent that it crossed a certain limit and Ross's power impact range soared to about 100 meters. Because of this, he had to put 25 talent proficiency points into physical enhancement to adapt to the skyrocketing power of distortion. I don't know how strong I am today, compared to a headquarters vice admiral. Ross's eyes showed a hint of thought. Headquarters vice admirals are strong and there is a huge strength gap between them. For example, Doberman and other vice admiral, who are only recently promoted, are obviously weaker than Tokikaki, Momosagi, or Garp, whose strength is close to an admiral. Vice admiral's position is the pinnacle of many Marines' life. Some people were promoted to a headquarters vice admiral 20 or 30 years ago, but they have stayed in this position for 20 or 30 years. Their strength may be slightly improved, but it is far less than admiral's standard. Ross pondered for a while because he had not fought with any headquarters vice admiral. It was still difficult to judge how strong he was, but the only thing he was certain of was that he is still a long way from a Marine admiral. Any Marine admiral can easily destroy an island. What is the scope of an island? The average island has a diameter of 10 kilometers. Aokiji can freeze the sea in Ice Age without knowing how much area it would cover. Compared to it, the power of distortion only works within 100 meters. That is to say, once a Marine admiral spotted him and found his exact position, his strength today does not qualify for any resistance at all. Journey to the next island begins. It's time to find new prey. Ross took a deep breath and his eyes flashed. It was difficult to find a pirate with a bounty of over 100 million berries in West Blue, but in the first half of Grand Line, with 3 arrows log pose, there were still many opportunities to find it. Marine Headquarters. This is a high-level conference room. Only the Marine generals above Vice Admiral are eligible to speak. As for the Rear Admiral officers, although they are eligible to come in, they are only qualified to listen. The room was quiet, without any noise. In silence, only Marine Fleet Admiral Sengoku's voice slowly heard in the hall. Therefore, the re-establishment of the G8 branch base will be decided according to the above methods. In addition, Sengoku pulled out another document, which was about the Ghost Hand pirates. He pressed the file on one hand and turned to look at Doberman. He said, "Who can tell me what is going on with this Ghost Hand pirates?" Sengoku took over the position of Fleet Admiral recently, and he had only recently adapted to the work of a Marine Fleet Admiral. Unexpectedly, at this time, such a huge matter happened on the sea. Doberman stood up and bowed his head deep at Sengoku. "I am willing to take responsibility for the improper handling by my subordinates." "Sit down." Sengoku looked at Doberman's eyes and glanced over the many vice admirals in the field. It is necessary to maintain Marine's face and prestige. If Marine loses their prestige, then the wicked forces on the sea will become more rampant. As for Ross, after knowing the causes and consequences, Sengoku was angry and speechless. A small hole in the wall was failed to be filled 3 or 5 times. And now, that small hole has caused the entire wall to collapse. It is impossible to revoke Ross's suspended bounty. Even if he reports it to the government won't agree to it and they will order his annihilation. Once Marine loses their prestige, the consequences will be very serious and it may even affect the entire sea. Therefore, in Sengoku's view, it is necessary to sacrifice Ross for worldwide justice. Although this is somewhat unfair to Ross, naturally. Since Ross killed a Marine captain of West Blue, The so-called injustice has ceased to exist. Whatever the cause, the cruel killing of a marine is an unforgivable crime. Sengoku also heard about Onigumo accident when it happened. After all, it was the defeat of a headquarters rear admiral, but he didn't take it seriously. He just ordered Akainu to take full responsibility for it. As a marine admiral, Akainu can't even look at a pirate of West Blue or even make a special trip to the sea, so it's still up to Doberman to approve the dispatch requests and provide their documents. The order to mobilize the G8 branch to encircle and suppress Ross was also issued by Akainu. But neither Vice Admiral Doberman nor Akainu expected the G8 base to suffer a tragic defeat. A Vice Admiral, along with 3 Rear Admirals, were killed in battle. When Sengoku finished his sentence, Akainu sat there with an ugly expression on his face. The problem is that we can't make minor mistakes into big ones. If there are mistakes, we must fill them up quickly. Ghost Hand Ross acts unrestrained and he is cruel. In order to maintain Marine's prestige, he must be exterminated as soon as possible. Sengoku said this. After looking at Akainu, his eyes turned to Aokiji, and he murmured, "It's up to Aokiji to fully handle this situation." Originally Akainu was responsible for the incident, then this matter is transferred to Aokiji by Sengoku. Many vice admirals present were naturally aware of the significance. Although Sengoku did not blame Akainu and Doberman, this is no different from the criticism and accusation. Akainu sat there without saying a word. Doberman kept his head down and was afraid to look at Akainu's expression. On the other hand, Aokiji, who heard Sengoku's order, nodded. It was rare to see him being serious at any meeting. On one hand, Ross was indeed extremely wicked. On the other hand, Nico Robin was on Ross's ship. The handling of the matter was dealt with. Although Akainu was not blamed, he was removed from this matter and it was handed to Aokiji. Sengoku looks at the people present and then prepares to adjourn the meeting. But, almost as his voice was about to be uttered, there was a sudden knock at the door. Then he saw a rear admiral rushing in with a newspaper in his hand. He said in some panic. Something went wrong. He sent the newspaper to Sengoku and Sengoku only glanced at it. He suddenly felt a buzz in his head and he looked carefully. His fist was already tight without him knowing. He saw that in the newspaper, an entire page was dedicated to the Ghost's Hand Pirates and Ghost Hand Ross. The most important issue is the content of the report. Less than, a pirate born by Marines? Greater than the title alone carries a tinge of irony. The elite troops of the Marine G8 branch led by the Vice Admiral Dalmatian and the branch Rear Admirals Roma, Hez and Elias were defeated by the Ghost Hand Pirates. According to some true information, the Ghost Hand Pirates have also previously defeated Marines' encirclement and suppression in slaughter Marines. It is a miracle for any Marines to survive him. But why is that? Why is he killing Marines? For this, we have to go back a year. What happened in West Blue at the beginning was unveiled, occupying almost most of the space on the page with a strong sense of irony in its tone. Seeing this, Sengoku could not hold back. Bastard. Veins were popping on his forehead and his fist was pinched. He wanted to kill the person who wrote this news report with one blow. At the same time, newspapers were sent to the conference room one after another and a copy was placed on everyone's desk. Everyone picked up the newspaper and read it. That's how a pirate hunter finally became a pirate under Marine's guidance. According to reliable intelligence from West Blue and from the Grand Line, the Ghost Hand Pirates has never looted any town and they never slaughtered any civilians. All those who fell by their hands were either pirates or were Marines. Well, this budding man, no, how far can Supernova, who has risen strongly, go against Marine? Let's wait and see. Bang. Sengoku finally couldn't hold back. He punched the conference table with one hand, creating a spiderweb-like crack on it and nearly tore the newspaper apart with his other hand. Damn. What's going on in this report? What happened to this newspaper? What is the government doing? How can this be distributed to the sea? The meeting room was silent. The expression on everyone's face became ugly and Sengoku's roar made them all shudder. As for the rear admirals, they were already sweating. Something happened. Something terrible has happened. Written by Morgan, one of the emperors of the Dark World and fueled by numerous forces, including revolutionaries, a large number of newspapers were spread all over the world. Even though the Marine and the government responded quickly and collected and destroyed the newspaper in an all-around way, it still caused a huge wave all over the world. Even if only a few people saw the newspaper, in the case of word-of-mouth transmission, it spread all over the world. For a time, the name of the Ghost Hand Pirates has earned the focus of the world. The government made every effort to cover up and publish newspapers in succession, stating that the story about Ghost Hand Ross was tactics of some wicked forces had secretly discredited Marine, but it was still difficult to completely eliminate the impact. World government and Marine headquarters were all overwhelmed. Marine. The anger of the government poured down and Doberman was almost dismissed directly. Sengoku and Akainu came forward to retain Doberman's vice admiral position, but still removed most of his power. This unexpected newspaper pushed Ross to the top of the storm. Fooferfurfer, hunting pirate? Confronting Marine? It's a crazy fellow, but I'm afraid that's the end of it, as he had completely angered the government and Marine. On the deck of the Don Quixote family pirate ship, Doflamingo lay on a lounge chair and looked at the newspaper in his hand, laughing strangely. Just entering Grand Line and he is pushed to the top of the wind and waves. It will be hard for him to survive, but if he can survive. Somewhere on the sea, Hawkeye looked at the newspaper in his hand and took a sip of red wine. East Blue, Fuchsia Village. Boss, read this newspaper. The news on it is very interesting. Lucky Roo, who held a piece of meat in one hand and a newspaper in his other hand, came to Shanks and handed it over. Shanks smiled and took it. After looking at it, he was surprised and said, "This kind of news, the government and Marine must be busy." Beckman sat next to Shanks, with a newspaper in his hand and a cigar in his mouth and a slight discoloration in his eyes. This kind of newspaper can't appear in the sea. The author is really bold. I'm afraid there is a force like the Revolutionary Army behind the scenes. Ghost Hand Pirates, Ghost Hand Ross, this name is also somewhat familiar. Looking at the pirate flag in the newspaper, Beckman quickly remembered the encounter in West Blue. It was the same pirate flag pattern. It's not an ordinary fellow, but the government should have labeled him as a must-kill person. Marines and the government will only be able to solve this problem and free up their hands by killing him. There's still a long way to go for him to see us in the new world. Beckman dropped the newspaper and glanced at the Shanks next to him. He shook his head and laughed, feeling that this kind of thing was still too illusory. For the chaos caused by the Ghost Hand Pirates, the world's major forces have all cast their eyes, some gloating, some ridicule the government and Marine, and some have noticed Ghost Hand Ross. However, most people hold a negative attitude towards the development of the Ghost Hand Pirates, because the government and Marine are undoubtedly thoroughly enraged by them. How terrible will the government and Marine, who are outraged, be? Nobody knows. Because the people who know it have long been hidden in the dust of history. On the shore of Elias' kingdom, Ross has returned to the Ghost Shadow ship. Lafitte continues to stay on the island and waits for the magnetic storage to be full, while Robin re-enters the island after Ross returns and enters the underground world of Elias to collect more intelligence. The intelligence of the Grand, especially for the pirates who have a bounty of over 100 million berries. Ross was sitting on the sofa in a wide lounge on the Ghost Shadow ship. His eyes were closed when a knock came at the door and Ross opened them. "Come in." Robin, wearing a lavender-colored jacket and shorts, came in through the door. Her figure was almost the same as that in the original series, but she looked younger. Ross sat up straight and smiled at Robin, saying, "Coming back so soon, I thought that you would be slower than Lafitte's. After the Marines were defeated by you, the dark forces of the Elias Kingdom became afraid of us and it became much easier to collect all the information." Robin walked over to Ross and said, "In the first half of Grand Line, counting Captain, there are 7 pirates with over 100 million bounties on their head. I have collected information about some of them." "Counting me?" Ross captured the extra content of Robin's words. Robin tilted her head and gently smiled. She placed 2 bounty orders on the coffee table in front of Ross. One of them was Ross's bounty order, which had a bounty of 200 million berries on it. In addition, another is Lafitte's bounty order, which amounts to 80 million berries. My bounty hasn't changed much, but with Captain and Navigator, our overall bounty has reached 359 million berries. If you improve your strength and fight some famous opponents, your bounty will increase too. However, as an intelligence member, you can try to not participate in battles. Ross took the bounty poster and looked at it and Robin smiled faintly. The more hidden the intelligence members are, the less they are concerned and they are safer that way. And Ross didn't say that to protect the only eye-catching girl on board. Robin nodded slightly and put a few bits of information on the table, along with a bunch of bounty posters. This is the first half of the Grand Line. Except Ross, there are 6 pirates who had bounties over 100 million berries. Naturally. Some of these data are detailed while others are missing a lot. 2 pirates have no specific location in intelligence. In the other 4 pirates, only 2 have confirmed location. Ross picked up the data and examined it carefully. He put aside the 4 missing and inaccurate locations of intelligence and continued to look at the remaining 2. Bounty of 230 million berries, Blood Wolf Pirate Captain, Blood Wolf Wren, appeared in Water 7 half a month ago. This distance is a little too far. Ross shook his head when he saw it. He had just arrived at the second island on the Grand Line and Water 7 was close to the Sabodi archipelago. Putting this information aside, Ross looks at the last piece of information. Bounty of 180 million berries, Iron Wall Pirates appeared at the port of Elfa 7 days ago, the port of Elfa. Ross's eyes glimmered with thought, and if he remembered correctly, the place should be on their route and not very far from the Elias kingdom. Although the log pose on Grand Line is a fixed channel, if there is an eternal pose pointing to other islands, one can easily change their route or retrograde. Ross also collected an eternal pose pointing to the kingdom of Elias. One can never have too many eternal poses. Among the information collected by Robin, even the captain of the Iron Wall Pirates, Iron Wall Rivero, have some special abilities. He has eaten a Paramecia devil fruit barrier fruit. If he remembers it correctly, then this devil fruit will belong to a newcomer after 10 years, that is to say, even if he does not kill Rivero, he will not survive for long. Captain. Compared to the information of other pirates, I think you need to look at this newspaper. Just as Ross confirmed that the Iron Wall Pirates will be his next target, Robin suddenly interrupted his thoughts and put a newspaper in front of him. Huh? Ross took a look at the newspaper and his eyes changed dramatically. It's really something that I didn't expect. This newspaper will push us in an unpredictable direction. Robin's tone was a little heavy. The government and Marines will be totally enraged, and once they suppress this matter, we will be treated with a bloody pursuit. Ross stared at the newspaper for a moment, put it aside, and suddenly gave a light laugh. But isn't it pleasant? Such news has been distributed to the sea. The Marine and the government are probably in a mess now. Although the report will lead the situation into an uncontrollable direction, there is no doubt that it is as refreshing as the appearance of a public toilet in front of you when you have an upset stomach. Captain. Robin's eyes flashed a trace of anxiety and she sighed softly in her heart. It was pleasant that the truth was revealed, but the situation that followed might become extremely difficult for us. The situation of originally defeating the G8 base to have a firm foothold on Grand Line would be completely destroyed. Marine and the government are bound to do something next, and once they strike, they are bound to wipe out the Ghost Hand pirates completely.